Hello and welcome to the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Watch-Along Project. This is a production of the Something Else Podcasting Network, and this is episode number 001 of Smoky Mountain Wrestling from February 1st, 1992, taped on October 30th, 1991 in Greenville, South Carolina. My name is Arya, as I believe most of you know. I am the host of Something Else with Arya, not KJ. And so this is a new project I've been wanting to start for some time. You might recall when we started the show way back when, KJ and I were doing 2 episodes a week. We were talking about Mid-South Wrestling and NWA Worldwide. When KJ dropped off the show, I stopped doing the NWA shows, mostly because, I just really wasn't enjoying them anyway. I was still looking for something to do, some second project to take on. And, I've always wanted to go back and rewatch Smoky Mountain Wrestling, or in my case, be watching it for the first time. And I figured it would make for a great watch along podcast. Now, unlike the Mid South show, this is not a show that, I'm going to be watching and then coming on to recap with you afterwards. I am going to be watching this and doing commentary as it happens. I'm going to be watching along, and I don't know if all the episodes are up on YouTube, at least the first handful that I've seen so far. So, if you haven't watched shows, or even if you have, you can go to YouTube, look up Smoky Mountain Wrestling. You put in Smoky Mountain Wrestling episode 1, and it pops up from a uploader named Old School Wrestling. And he's got them. I don't know if he's got them all. I'd have to double check, but he's got most of them. And so if you want, watch along through YouTube. And we're going to just sit back and watch some old school wrestling. Now, for those who don't know Smoky Mountain Wrestling, or might be new to it, it was a promotion that opened in late 1991 by Jim Cornette, and it was financed by Rick Rubin, the music producer. And he was always a huge wrestling fan. He attended shows in Madison Square Garden in the 70s and 80s. He's a big NWA fan. As a matter of fact, when he began, or matter of fact, the way this all basically came around was that he went to an NWA show, and his two favorite people that he wanted to meet were Ric Flair and Jim Cornette. And one way or another, it all ended up here where, they're launched a wrestling promotion completely run and operated by Jim Cornette. Rick Rubin does have, a few suggestions that we'll see over the years. And, but for the most part, he basically stayed in the background and wrote the checks and just wanted to enjoy a good old school wrestling show, especially in comparison to how the WWF and WCW was at the time. And that's what we're going to go back and look at here. So let's go into it now. Let's start here. By the way, we'll get to that here in a few minutes here. So we're going to start here. I'm going to play it right from the beginning of the thing with the intro of the show, complete with the opening theme song. I'm not going to play the opening theme song every week, but, just so in case you've never heard it, pardon me, in case you've never heard it, you get to hear it this one time here. So let's go to the intro of the show.
Wrestling fans from Greenville, South Carolina's Memorial Auditorium. Welcome to another action-packed, exciting hour of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Professional wrestling like it used to be and the way you like it. I'm Bob Caudle, and on this week's program, you're going to be seeing such outstanding stars as White Lightning, Tim Horner, Fantastics, Bobby Fulton is going to be here, as well as Primetime Brian Lee. And Mysterious Black Scorpion also is going to be here, fans. We'll be talking with two managers. We'll be talking with Ron Ward and also with Jim Cornette and with a commissioner, Smoky Mountain Commissioner Bob Armstrong. Our big main event, Bobby Fulton of the Fantastics against the Russian Bear, Ivan Koloff. And what a match that's going to be with. And here to help me call all of the action, none other than the Dirty Dutchman himself, Dutch Mantell. Dutch?
Well, first of all, I'm here to see, hold it down out there, I'm here to see Ivan Koloff and Bobby Fulton lock horns in this ring right here today. And I'm wondering, they've been talking about this guy called Primetime Brian Lee. Well, I'm going to get my first look at him today, as will all you fans, and I'm just going to see what Brian Lee's got to offer here.
Fans, it's going to be a great hour. Stay with us. We're about ready for the action. Let's go to the ring.
All righty. So the first match, and they're coming to the ring right now while we're talking. It's going to be Killer Kyle versus Robert Gibson of the Rock and Roll Express. Before we talk about that, just to recap what you heard from Bob and Dutch. Now, Bob Caudle, was the WCW announcer for years, or NWA, Agent Park Promotions. Dutch Mantell, he wrestled, he booked in Puerto Rico. And this is your commentary team for most of the next 2 years. There will be times when Dutch is wrestling or for whatever reason just isn't there. But by and large, this is your announce team. And they actually end up being a really good announce team. Now, in case you're curious, because I mentioned that I haven't watched show. I've watched, for whatever reason, I never made it past like the first 20 to 25 episodes. I believe I've pretty much watched over the years up until when they crowned the first champion, which is that Volunteer Slam in May. And so this is the beginning of February 1st, as a matter of fact. And they talk about everything we're going to see in the show. Tim Horner is going to be here. We're going to have the Black Scorpion is going to be here. The main event is Ivan Koloff versus Bobby Fulton of the Fantastics. We'll get into that a little bit later on. And they mentioned the two managers who are going to be here to talk today. It's going to be Jim Cornette, who we're not supposed to know. Jim Cornette's the booker and owner and operator of the company. He's just Jim Cornette, heel manager extraordinaire. And well, Bob Caudle introduces him as Ron Ward, and for whatever reason they didn't have him redo it, because it's actually Ron Wright, not Ron Ward. But we'll get into that here when that comes up here. By the way, this show and next week's show was taped at an independent show that Bobby Fulton was running, in Greenville. This was in October. Jim Cornette talked about this on his show a couple times, where he offered to bring in the undercard and pay them and take care of them as long as he could film it and essentially use it as the Smoky Mountain Wrestling pilots, which is what we have here. So we have our first match in Smoky Mountain Wrestling history. It's, as I mentioned earlier, it's Robert Gibson versus Killer Kyle. And for those interested in, these things, Killer Kyle was the very first person introduced on the very first edition of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Gibson is here by himself because Ricky Morton was still under contract to WCW, and he would still be in WCW, I think, till June or July. Then that's when he comes in here and they reform the Rock and Roll Express. Spoiler alert, for 5 months down the road. If you're watching along and if you listen to the audio for the commentary was off at the start of the match. They didn't level it correctly. They had the audience audio turned up way too high. And after about 10 or 15 seconds, they fixed it and leveled it out there. Killer Kyle, for those who don't know, he comes out here. He's basically doing a mobster gimmick. He comes out in, his bolo hat, his suit and tie. He wrestles in dress pants, collared shirt, and suspenders. Right now, we're getting a spot. Robert Gibson's running off the ropes, running shoulder first into Kyle, not moving him or not moving very much. But then he dives at Kyle with a clothesline. Really slow bump. And, Killer Kyle, he's a young guy. getting his first push, well, getting his first televised push anyway. You know, so he's kind of green here, and it shows. But Gibson's doing a good job here. Gibson runs into the post shoulder first to get the heat, to let Killer Kyle get the heat on him here. Kyle, by the way, came out with a violin case. I don't think we ever find out what's in that violin case, and probably not a violin. You get my drift here. Now, during the show, when there might be nothing to talk about, or we might have something slow, like Killer Kyle putting Robert Gibson in an armbar, I'm going to be talking about other things happening in the world of wrestling at this moment. So, this is February 1st, 1992. WWF has just gotten out of the Royal Rumble. Ric Flair is the new WWF champion, and they're starting to build to WrestleMania. And while it hasn't aired yet, they have taped the angles to build up to the top 4 matches at Mania, which are Hulk Hogan versus Sid, Ric Flair versus Randy Savage, Undertaker versus Jake Roberts, and Bret Hart versus Roddy Piper. Here we go with the finish, by the way. Gibson was in the corner. Kyle ran into the corner, and Gibson did an up and over and then rolled him up for the pin. So Robert Gibson is your first winner in the first match in Smoky Mountain Wrestling history. And they're showing a replay here. And then from here, we're going to play some audio here, just like Mid-South. We're going to listen to the promos and other interesting things. Well, let's go to an interview now with the Fantastics.
Match coming up later in this program.
It's a pleasure to be here in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and today my brother's going to be in the main event.
You know, I want to tell you something, Ivan Koloff, the Russian Bear. We have traveled and battled far and wide across the United States, and right here on Smoky Mountain Wrestling, we're going to meet in the main event. That's right. Koloff, I feel that personally this could be the roughest, toughest match we've had yet. I know that the fans are excited about it. I'm fired up and excited about it. Koloff, I know you can get mean and nasty, brother, but let me tell you one thing right now. We have proved in the past we can take a licking and keep right on ticking. So Russian Bear, Koloff, be prepared for the fight of your life from Bobby Fulton.
Fans, earlier today we had a chance to talk to Smoky Mountain Commissioner, wrestling great Bob Armstrong. Bob Armstrong has a lot of ideas and a lot of thoughts about what's really going to make Smoky Mountain Wrestling great. We know you'd be interested in hearing that, so right now let's hear from Commissioner Bob Armstrong.
Fans, here's wrestling legend Bullet Bob Armstrong, now Commissioner of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Bob, you bring over 30 years of experience to this job. What can we expect from you as Commissioner?
Well, you know, I have had over 30 years of wrestling experience, and I'd have every trick tried on me in the book. Right. And I've always been proud of my profession. It's been good to me and my family over the years. But what I've seen in the past few years, frankly, Mr. Cottle, I don't agree with. So when Smoky Mountain Wrestling Organization called me and said, would you like to be a commissioner, I thought, what a perfect opportunity to bring back to the people wrestling as it should be, as it used to be. I mean, wrestling affordable at family prices where the whole family can come and enjoy wrestling like it was invented. It's the oldest sport known to man, and it's going to be treated like a sport as long as I'm here. The fines will be not light but heavy. The fines will be heavy for any infraction of the rule. There will be no over-the-top rope. There'll be no foreign object. You will not touch a referee because there's a little man in there, a little referee that may weigh 150 pounds, getting pushed around by some big 290-pound guy. Well, I still wrestle sometime, Bob, and I can push around myself. So whatever needs to be done, Smoky Mountain Wrestling is going to do it. We want to be a part of your community. We want you to be a part of us. We want your cards and letters. Tell us what you want. I'm going to do my job as commissioner. I know it's not going to be easy. Don't get me wrong.
Well, they're going to test you.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, they'll test me, but I'm up to the test. Smoky Mountain Wrestling will be the best.
Fans, there you hear it from Commissioner Bob Armstrong. It's going to be great, Smoky Mountain Wrestling. You be sure to be with us.
Now, obviously, I let the Fantastics promo bleed through into Bob Cottle talking to Bob Armstrong. But to go back, the Fantastics, by the way, it's not Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers, like you might remember in the mid to late 80s. It's Bobby Fulton and his brother Jackie Fulton. And this week in the main event, Bobby Fulton is going to be wrestling Ivan Koloff, the former WWF champion, the man who ended the title reign of Bruno Sammartino in 1971. Obviously, the man is a lot more experienced than Bobby Fulton, but that'll play into our main event here. Then we get our introduction to Smoky Mountain Commissioner Bullet Bob Armstrong. Uh, Bob is pretty much here throughout most of Smoky Mountain, if not the entire thing. And he's there. And, I'm not going to spoil anything for you if you don't want it, but, Jim Cornette talks about in his podcast, the plans for, the plans for Bullet Bob, and a few others here. And, they set the course early on. Bullet Bob is the family-friendly promotion that he's running here with Smoky Mountain. He's a fan favorite commissioner. He's doing things for the people. He's here to enforce the rules. Sometimes it's not popular, but he's here to make sure that the wrestlers follow the rules and are doing what they need to do here. And some of the rules that they mention are, you can't throw somebody over the top rope. It's disqualification. No foreign objects and no touching of the referee. And this is all going to play out because we're going to have a few angles, over the first month or so that basically enforce, what the rules are and really beat them into your head. So then we get our next match. And if you're watching along on YouTube, you'll be seeing it already happening here. It's Bad Boy Barry Horowitz, one-on-one with primetime Brian Lee. Brian Lee, of course, would go on to greater fame, first as the fake Undertaker and that awful angle in 1994. Honestly, the angle wasn't that great, but the match was what really was awful. And of course, he then went on to ECW fame, where he feuded with Tommy Dreamer, famously taking a bump off a scaffold through like 6 or 7 tables that were stacked up. And then he ended up in the WWF as Chains as a member of Disciples of Apocalypse. And I think he spent some time in the early days of TNA as well. And you might remember him as having long, dark brown or even black hair. At this point, he has long blonde hair. And to be honest, he looks more like Danny Spivey here than he would later on. The fans are cheering for Brian Lee because he's a babyface, but his reaction is paling in comparison to Robert Gibson's reaction. At one point here, Horowitz drops a leg for a 2 count, which angered Brian Lee, but that didn't amount to much, and Horowitz takes back over. So we were talking about the top 4 matches that the WWF was booked already for WrestleMania, as Horowitz hits a beautiful belly-to-belly suplex here. And so, everyone wanted Hogan Flair at this WrestleMania, and I always wonder, what would the rest of the card be? Because if you had Hogan Flair, you now have Savage with no opponent, although, because his feud with Jake Roberts is pretty much finishing up here. You have Sid with no opponent. I guess he could have done Randy Savage versus Sid, which that could have been interesting because I don't remember them ever actually wrestling. I'm sure someone is sitting out there going, "Well, Arish, they wrestled, 15 times," and I'm like, "Well, I don't remember the 15 times if they did." Watching Barry Horowitz here, it is hard to believe that, he mostly gets used as a jobber throughout his career. And, we talked about it on the Mid-South show, and I don't know when you're actually going to hear this because I don't know when I'm going to start posting these shows. But in the show that I dropped a week before I'm talking about this, Iron Mike Sharp debuted in Mid-South Wrestling, and he's best known as a WWF enhancement talent. But, these enhancement talents aren't just people who, you get the reputation, you hear about how, these wrestlers, they're new, they've had 2 or 3 matches. Mick Foley, for instance, his second match ever was as a WWF jobber. But, a lot of these people have experience. They are well-trained wrestlers. And just because you'd see them losing on TV every week didn't mean that they weren't any good. So Brian Lee has picked up Barry Horowitz here over the shoulder, and he dropped to his knees, which is called the cancellation. And Brian Lee picks up the win here. in his first win in his first match here on Smoky Mountain. So Primetime Brian Lee, a force to be reckoned with here in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And as he leaves the ringside area, we're getting a replay. And then after this, we're going to hear our first promo from not Ron Ward, but Mr. Ron Wright, who will go on to become, he goes on and has a big role here in Smoky Mountain. And we're going to hear from him here for a minute, and it's going to help set up that angle. And let me just go ahead and press play, and then I'll be right back up to that to talk about it.
Fans, right now, let's take a moment to hear these words from legendary wrestling great, now a top manager, Ron Wright.
It certainly is nice to be here on Smoky Mountain Wrestling. I'd just like to tell everyone, you wonder why I'm sitting here in this wheelchair the way I am. My wrestling career for years, all of those men beating on me took a toll on me. Now I'm needing a hip implant and a knee implant, and I'm down here scouting, looking over all of these top wrestlers they have in this Smoky Mountain Wrestling area. I'm going to try to find some of the top wrestlers that I can maybe get in there and get me a contract with, to where I can go out and make me some money and have this surgery that I'm needing. I'd like to just tell all of the wrestlers in this area, I'm one of the world's most famous, well-known wrestlers, and I'd like for all of them to get in there and show me what they've got, and I'm going to be looking at them, and one of these days here I'm going to try to get someone up, get their name on a contract, and if I can get them on a contract with Ron Wright, I'll be able to have this surgery and take these men to the top in this Smoky Mountain wrestling empire. Everybody remember that, because that's what I'm here for.
Now, I admit this does sound a little hokey. You have this older gentleman who is a legend in this part of the area, Ron Wright, and he's here in a wheelchair, and he looks like your grandfather. He's an older gentleman. He's stuck in a wheelchair because he needs money to get a hip and knee surgery because he either doesn't have insurance or his insurance won't cover it. And he's here in Smoky Mountain to, find himself a wrestler, because he needs a wrestler to sign up and to help him, make some money and to, afford his operations. And yeah, and he was just fantastic, and we're gonna hear a lot more from him. And by the way, he sounds like, he's already in his 70s, or at least, late 60s, like, your kindly old grandfatherly wrestler. He was born in 1938, which means at this point, he's 53 years old, which, I'm not gonna, disparage anything, but it's like Terry Funk was 53 years old when he won the ECW title in 1997. So it's like, keep in mind, there's differences in 53 years old. I think R-Truth is like 70 years old. He still looks like he's 20. But, they're really playing up, the angle here with, the kindly old man. He needs help. He needs a wrestler to help him get his operations. And it's going to play out in the weeks and months to come out. So we next up get our first look at White Lightning Tim Horner. And he's going one-on-one with Joe Kazana. And there are probably some people out there who already know what I'm going to say here, but if you've never listened to any of Jim Cornette's diatribes about working with Tim Horner, they are well worth going out of your way to listen to on YouTube. Basically, when they were all still in WCW and everyone was miserable working there under Jim Herd, Tim Horner went to Jim Cornette, because everyone basically knew they were on their way out, and told Tim that, he had a backer who will put, I think, like $20,000 into starting a wrestling company in Knoxville, Tennessee. And Jim, who already had the plan starting for Smoky Mountain, he got worried that, Tim would lose this guy's money. It wouldn't be anything, and it would ruin the chance for Smoky Mountain to get off the ground when they were coming in to do a real territory that had, money behind it, or some money behind it. Because $20,000 is going to get you much, even in 1990 in the pro wrestling business. And what Jim didn't realize at the time was Tim just wanted a vehicle to put himself over. And we're going to get the best and worst of Tim Horner, over the next 2 years, because Tim's in the company until the summer of 1994, which is when they had their big blow up. Jim hired Tim to not only be an experienced wrestler who could teach new young wrestlers how to work Southern style, which he is good at. He is a, good enough wrestler. He's, good enough in the ring. But he was also there to do a lot of office stuff that he was not very good at. He was there to sell merchandise. He was supposed to, there's a story about him with a ring truck and all this other stuff that he just failed at. And, I get that, not everybody's going to be good at everything, but he basically he took money under false pretense for years before this final blow up between Jim and Tim. Now, the good news is, and, I know I said Tim Horner's a good wrestler. You may not, because he's not a very exciting wrestler, but he is good at wrestling. He is so much better as a wrestler than he is a talker. And we're going to hear him talk and talk and talk and talk over the years. And so, yeah, just be happy for now. We're just watching him wrestle. So Joe Kazan is going up to the top rope here. And Tim Horner walks over and flips him off with basically the Ric Flair top rope bump that you saw Ric Flair take in every match he ever had. Because, Ric Flair, it was always weird that, like everyone's got their pattern spots, and you can, I know Bret Hart always complained about Ric Flair doing the same spots over and over again, but, everyone had their spots, including Bret, that you did over and over and over again. And that was just one of them, is the stand up to the top rope and get thrown off. Tim Horner with a roll up and the slowest natural bridge in the history of mankind picks up the win here. And so Tim Horner is now 1-0 on Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And, he is so excited about this. Yay, he wins. And here's a funny thing, since the roll-up wasn't very fast to begin with, but we're now going to get a slow motion replay of the roll-up and the natural bridge, which I'm almost positive was there on purpose to make fun of him. Let's listen to a Jim Cornette promo now.
And thank you, fans. Right here with me, of course, the Louisville Slugger himself, Jim Cornette. I guess you got to say one of the premier managers in all of professional wrestling.
I know what everybody out there in television land, I know what you're saying. Jim Cornette, you're an international star. You're a celebrity. Why are you in a nothing happening stinking place like Greenville, South Carolina? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, I realize that it's not often you people in the backwoods, you hillbillies out in the sticks, get to see a celebrity. So today I was feeling charitable. But what's more, I heard that professional wrestling is coming back.
Yes, sir.
You see, over the past couple of years, these big corporations, these major promotions, they've turned it into a circus, into a sideshow. It's not whether you can wrestle anymore. It's whether you want to wear a funny costume. It's not whether you can fight. It's whether you can sell a doll over at Toys R Us. It's not whether you've got guts. It's how juiced up on steroids you are. They've turned professional wrestling into a joke, so I turned my back on them. Because I made my reputation managing the greatest tag team in the history of wrestling, the Midnight Express. And they were a team that could wrestle and would fight and would let nobody stand in their way of getting to the top and winning a title. Nobody ever gave us anything. And we wouldn't turn around and do no favors. That's why they pushed us to the side. Well, brother, coming up in the weeks to come, I'm going to be bringing a dynamic tag team to Smoky Mountain Wrestling. A team that's going to revolutionize tag team wrestling just like the Midnight Express did, because, brother, this is the real deal. Ain't no cartoon wrestling, and Jim Cornette is going to be the king of the hill.
Fans, that's something to look for from Jim Cornette, and we'll be back right after this.
So you heard it there from JC. It was his first promo on the company, and in some ways it's hilarious how they're essentially doing the same angle with him and Ron Wright, just taking it obviously in two different directions. They're both here to find new people to manage. And actually in Jim Cornette's, way, he already has a tag team. He's just waiting for the perfect time to bring them in and show them off to the Smoky Mountain audience here. And that's the plan. And he goes off, and he does this a lot. And, if you've ever heard Jim Cornette's podcast or ever heard him talk, he does this a lot in general. He goes off on, WCW, WWF, making sly comments about both of them. He mentions hating what wrestling has turned into, and specifically mentions, and this was a good one, he specifically mentions the steroid problem in wrestling. This is February of 1992, so to give you an idea, this is months after the George Zahorian trial, where he gets found guilty of distributing steroids, and about 2 years before Vince's trial for the same thing. And actually, it's a good year and a half before Vince even gets indicted for it. And so that's where we are in the world. Jim Cornette, he's bringing in a tag team to revolutionize tag team wrestling. If you know who it is, great. If you don't know, well, I'm not going to tell you, but, just prepare to be surprised when it happens. So our next match is, by the way, before I get to the next match, Dutch Mantel walked off the set during the Jim Cornette interview. No idea why, since it doesn't get brought up again. It doesn't play into anything. Maybe it's something long-term that we're going to see later on. But now, as previously talked about, we're on to our next match as Paul Miller takes on the Black Scorpion. Now, for those of you who forget, the Black Scorpion was this awful angle in WCW in 1990. Well, it started off with promise, and a lot of bad angles start off with promise. But it started off with an opponent from Sting's past, haunting Sting, and he's going to come and take Sting's NWA World Title. And this is when Ole was booking, and I don't think Ole ever had a plan for who the Black Scorpion was going to be, because it was a whole bunch of different people and house shows and did the match on Clash of the Champions. I think it was Al Perez when they did the Clash match. It was not very good at all. And, they eventually got Ric Flair to go under the mask to do the finish of the angle. And Flair only did it in exchange for getting to win the NWA title from Sting a few weeks after the fact, which is what happened. This Black Scorpion is not Ric Flair, it's not Al Perez, or any of the other people who played it. It's actually Jeff Farmer. And no, it's not Jumpin' Jeff Farmer, who had an interview conducted earlier where he said, yep, this is the Jeff Farmer who would become NWO Sting in WCW, and he also was Cobra and feuded with Sergeant Craig Pittman at one point. I'm honestly not sure what the point of having a Black Scorpion is here, other than to thumb your nose at WCW for that angle. Of course, like I said, that turned to be Ric Flair, and I don't think even the dumbest fan in the audience who knew the Black Scorpion was Ric Flair a year before this, I don't think even the dumbest fan at this time thought that this was Ric Flair in the ring. I don't think it was that stupid. It's possible, and keep in mind this is taped in October, so Flair doesn't win the WWF title till January. It's possible that even though Cornette and Flair are friends, that they did this as a subtle dig at Flair, who, when he left WCW, actually Rick Rubin and Jim Cornette offered him something like $25,000 per month to just come and wrestle in Knoxville once a month, while still being able to wrestle wherever else he wanted to, which obviously didn't happen. And Scorpion is lackadaisical, and Paul Miller, by the way, gets the upset win with a surprise small package. So here to show you what happens. Enhancement talent doesn't lose all the time. And in the very first show, Black Scorpion overlooks his opponent, and Paul Miller rolls him up for the pin. And big win for Paul Miller, not defeating Ric Flair, but instead defeating Jeff Farmer as the Black Scorpion. And let's go now to Primetime Brian Lee, who's we're going to listen to talk here in just a second.
Fans, right now, a young man that has wrestled around the world and successfully, I might add, Primetime Brian Lee. And Brian, welcome to Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
Thank you, Bob. I just want to take a second of your time and these great people out here. I want to let you know in the near weeks to come, there's going to be a heavyweight tournament, and I plan to be in it, and I plan to win it, and I plan to wear the gold. All you great people behind me, I know I can do it.
Excuse me.
Wait a minute, Dutch.
Excuse me 1 minute. I know it's not my time, but, you know, I'm just going to give you some helpful advice. You know, when you was in the ring a while ago, I was watching real close, and you made some mistakes, even though small and minor they may be. You know, when you see, I would have you let him clothesline you one time. See, that would have never happened to me. I wouldn't let him do that to me. See, and you had him in an arm bar one time. See, I'd have done that differently. You know, coming to think of it, I'd have wrestled that whole match differently. Now, if you learn to do that, you may be successful. Unless you do, I think you're just going to flounder around on the bottom. You know, I'd wrestle the whole match differently.
You're exactly right, Dutch. You would have wrestled it differently. You'd have lost the match. You may be a good wrestler, but you're not ready for prime time.
Hey, Dutch. There's your answer, no doubt about that. Fans,
You know,
look for this
just
young
to show you,
man.
some people can't take constructive criticism.
A young man you're going to hear a lot of on Smoky Mountain Wrestling. We'll be back with our main event right after this.
Sorry if you heard me coughing there on the air. But yeah, so Brian Lee's first promo here, you know, it could be a lot better, but he's also far from the worst promo that we'll hear on these shows. And so he's here. He wants to be the Smoky Mountain champion, and they're setting up an angle here already with him and Dutch Mantel, where Dutch is, you know, you hear Dutch. He's trying to give the guy some advice, and he's just not listening. He's not taking the advice. And primetime Brian Lee, who claims that he's 6'6", and you know, he says that if he took Dutch's advice and wrestled like Dutch, he probably would have lost. And then he tells him his catchphrase that we'll be hearing way too many times is that Dutch is not ready for prime time. That leads us into our main event of week 1. Yep, an hour without commercials is only like 42 minutes, so it goes fairly quickly. We got our main event. It is Ivan Koloff, former WWF champion, as mentioned earlier, versus Bobby Fulton. Ivan is obviously at the end of his career here, and in many ways, his last serious push ended in 1986 when Nikita turned babyface after McIntyre's accident. Because even though he still stuck around for a little bit with Paul Jones's Army, he really didn't do much. Let's play now an inset promo with Ivan talking about this match.
All right, fans, right now, let's hear what Ivan Koloff had to say about Bobby Fulton.
Smoky Mountain Promotion. Ivan Koloff is very happy to be here. Not like you, Bobby Fulton. Fantastic. It is over for you. You made a big mistake to challenge Ivan Koloff. I'm going to embarrass you, humiliate you, pull, push, tug on whatever arm or leg I get a hold of you. I'm going to make you suffer.
So yeah, he just said that he's very excited to be in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, but Bobby Fulton is not. Apparently, Bobby Fulton is not excited to be here in Mid-South Wrestling. Shouldn't that make him the heel in this instead of Ivan? You know? But, you know, who needs logic all the time in wrestling anyway, right? But, yeah. So, as I mentioned, you know, Ivan was still in the NWA for like 2 more years after Nikita turned, but didn't really do a whole lot before leaving at the end of 88, beginning of 89. We're going to listen, by the way. Dutch is about to bring up how Brian Lee talked to him here in just a second.
Time.
Especially that treachery, I guess.
You know, I can't get over the way Brian Lee talked to me out here.
The way he talked to you.
Right.
Dutch, I thought it was just the other way around. You was telling him what all he had done wrong, how you would have done it different, how you would have won that match.
I was giving him helpful hints, and he took it wrong. See, that's, I don't know, he's got a bad attitude. You know, next week I'm going to wrestle right here on this program, and I want Brian Lee to be watching because I'm going to show him how it's really done. I'm going to make my debut here on Smoky Mountain Wrestling next week.
Oh, boy. Hey, I'm glad to know that, Dutch. I'm going to look forward to seeing you here, right here next weekend, fans. And Dutch, don't forget, you promised that, and you promised all the fans that you'll be right here.
So, yep. So Dutch, to combat Brian Lee not listening to him, Dutch is going to wrestle right here next week right here on Smoky Mountain. So so Brian Lee can listen to him and go from here, or watch him and see how a true professional wrestles. So Ivan and Bobby are having, a decent enough match. It is what it is here. And where there's one Russian in wrestling, there's always many Russians, and Bob's about to tell you about them.
Times, and I tell you, he recently brought his brother or his nephew, Ivan's nephew Vladimir, to the USA, and I can anticipate that we might see them in some tag team action. Hey, wait a minute, Dutch. Look who's down there at ringside. Do you see him? There he is.
There's
Ron Wright.
There's Mr. Wright.
Yes, sir. Ron Wright sitting there in that wheelchair, looking at the action in the ring.
He's scouting.
You think that's what he's doing? Is he scouting these two?
See, the man, he needs money. He needs a hip operation and a knee operation, and he said he's looking for men to manage, and he's down there, and he's looking now. At this point, it's not clear. Is he looking at Bobby Fulton to manage?
I was going to ask you that. Do you think he's scouting Fulton, or do you think he's scouting Koloff?
Well, I don't know. I could run down there and ask him, but I think he's in his own world right now. He's scouting, and you know how, there he is. He's watching that match very intently.
Yeah, I was going to say, he's got an intense look in his eye as he's looking up at the action in the ring.
I really feel for Mr. Wright. He was a legend. He was a legend wrestler, and he was a legend being just a manager. And now he's come upon hard times, and a lot of people, they don't feel compassion for their fellow man like I do. I feel for the homeless, and I feel for the underprivileged and the handicapped and all that, and I feel bad for Mr. Wright.
Well, the size and the weight right now of Ivan Koloff seems to begin to take a toll.
Alrighty, so Bob, first we listened to him talking about how Ivan's nephew, Vladimir Koloff, is brought into the area, and we'll be seeing him shortly. Vladimir Koloff, by the way, is the same person who wrestled in '87 as Vladimir Petrov in JCP. Plus, as you heard, Ron Wright is rolled out in his wheelchair to watch the main event. The fans, didn't know who he was because they didn't show the promo he did earlier to them. So they don't know how to take him at first, just this kindly old man, sitting in a wheelchair at ringside. Kindly old 53-year-old man, which, I really feel when I'm 38 at the moment. So yeah, you heard Dutch recap the angle. He's out here looking for a wrestler. They're not sure, who's he scouting. He's scouting Ivan, the former WWF champion, or is he scouting Bobby Fulton, who, not a former world champion and is younger, but he obviously has a lot more of a future in wrestling than Ivan Koloff. At least theoretically is more of a future than Ivan. They fight outside the ring at one point. In fact, I got something right now. And Ron Wright reaches out to Bobby Fulton, which distracted him. Ivan just threw Fulton head first into the ring post. And we get some close-ups of Ron just watching. Ivan just threw him into the barricade, and he dropped a chair on Bobby Fulton, which is not a disqualification for some reason. We may hear about a fine maybe, but at least for now it's nothing. And, they're just continuing the match here. Now, just a minute, I'm going to be playing through the end of the show, the end of this match and then the end of the show. Pardon me. And then I'll be back to recap everything we've seen here. And that'll be coming up here in a few seconds.
The ground, Koloff straight over the second rope.
Pardon me.
He is now out here. And now there is Wright is over to shake the hand of Koloff.
Shaking his hand, a good sportsmanlike gesture.
And Koloff with a right hand, he just about turned. He did. He turned the lights out. He turned Fulton's lights out with that right hand. Did Wright give him something outside of the ring? Ivan Koloff. Here comes Jackie Fulton in, and Jackie now complaining to the referee. Koloff is saying no.
Now what's he complaining about?
Well, Jackie, I think is saying here is he and Koloff now slugging it out.
Now this is not right. That's not fair. Jackie Fulton is not a very sportsmanlike man coming in the ring like that and attacking. Ivan Koloff had just wrestled for 10 minutes.
Wait a minute, right here. There's an object. He did give Koloff something. And the referee's going to reverse that decision, it looked to me like, as he's over now. Here comes Vladimir. We got the Russian.
Well, that's
and
good.
the fantastic.
That's
Four
good.
of them in the ring.
Well,
Look at chaos right now.
That turnabout's fair play. Did he reverse that decision?
Was that accidental by right or not? When he reached up the hand, or to shake the hand of Ivan Koloff. Now, here's Jackie Fulton being choked. Ivan Koloff has got the chain.
Is that Vladimir, the nephew?
That's the nephew. That's Vladimir. He's a big one, too.
Oh, he is a big one, isn't he?
Over the top rope now. And Bobby Fulton is being hung right there over that top rope. There's that Jackie. That's Jackie.
Now Bobby's up.
Yeah, here's Bobby Fulton now from behind on Koloff as Jackie was just being choked and hung right over the top rope by the Koloff. Fans, what a way to end, and what a wild time it was. There's all chaos broke loose, and the hand right now being raised. Bobby Fulton is the winner. We'll be back. Let's take time out for this. Fans, what a wild, chaotic finish to that match here. The Fantastic and Commissioner right here, Bob Armstrong.
Let me interrupt right here. You know, I told you that foreign objects will not be tolerated. Right here it is, right here on this paper. That's a rule. Yeah. Ivan Koloff, you're going to be fined $500.
Wow.
And as a matter of fact, while we're talking about Koloffs, if they want to fight each other's battles, we can settle that. I tell you what, I'll sign a match next week right here on TV, and we'll put both the Koloffs against the Fantastics. How about that?
All right, what about that, Bob? What about that?
Hey, yeah, I'm going to go sign it right now, boy.
Thank you, Bob. Hey, listen, let me tell you, a lot of things are happening around here. I couldn't agree with Jim Cornette more. They're bringing it back to wrestling what it's about, the way the fans like it. Now, Koloff, I've been hit with fists before in the past, and by yours. And I don't know who that goof was in the wheelchair, Bob,
right.
But he handed something to Ivan Koloff. My brother seen it. Hey, we just want law and order. Like Bob, the commissioner, said, Armstrong, right? He's going to sign this match next week as a main event. Well, let me tell you, bald-headed commie geeks, something right now. This is Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Things like that aren't going to happen. We're going to fight fire with fire. Hey, Bob, they jacked my jaw, and I'll tell you, they tried to publicly hang my brother right on TV. We thought about a fresh wrestling start. Well, we see that when the Koloffs are around, things are going to start a little different, and it's their way. Hey, like I said, we're ready to fight fire with fire, and as long as those great people of the United States get behind us, we know that we're going to do one thing. That's kick tail, just like we did overseas against Saddam Hussein and those characters. We're going to do it with Ivan Koloff and that no good other nasty bull-headed Koloff. And let me tell you something wrong right. That's his name, right? The guy in the wheelchair.
Right. That's right.
You may be crippled and you may be an old man, but brother, next time you interfere in my match, I'm going to pick you up out of that wheelchair myself, and I'm going to kick you straight in the booty, because regardless, you shouldn't have got in the ring. You shouldn't even been ringside. And hey, Bob, like I said, this is far from over, and next week the fans are going to see it on TV. No more publicly hangings. Hey, I'll tell you, I can't wait.
See you next week, fans.
So Bobby Fulton is here to advocate for elder abuse, which, you know, is nice. And I apologize for sneezing into the microphone a minute ago. Vince McMahon would probably really hate me for many reasons, and that would be one of them. So to recap everything we've just seen, going back to the finish of the match. So Ivan is dropped over the middle rope, and Ron rolls up to the ring. And what we see is he's shaking Ivan's hand, but he's actually slipping something. He's slipping him something. He's slipping him a foreign object of some kind. And Ivan uses it to KO Bobby Fulton for the win. Jackie runs in to protest, and he fights with Ivan for a little bit. Ivan, who put the object underneath his arm, he dropped the object. The referee saw it, came to the obvious conclusion, and reversed the decision, giving the win to Bobby Fulton by disqualification. Bobby Fulton is still down at this point. Vladimir Koloff runs in to make it a 2-on-1 on Jackie. And then they use the Russian chain to hang Jackie Fulton over the top rope. And they were hanging him from there until Bobby ran over to make the save. And then we went to commercial. We came back with the promo we heard with Bob Armstrong, where he levies a $500 fine against Ivan Koloff for his actions. and he makes next week's tag team main event match between the Russians and the Fantastics. Bobby cuts a good promo, or at very least a very passionate promo, to end the show and build up, what we're going to see next week here. And then he threatens to kick Ron Wright in the booty, and that is it. So that's the end of our first show. It was a good show. It established several new wrestlers, started a handful of long-term angles, in addition to setting up 2 matches for next week. They have work on their babyface side, obviously. Obviously the heels, especially the heel managers, are going to be a lot better on the microphone than the baby faces are, with Brian Lee and the Fantastics are the ones who got the promo time this week. Obviously the best babyface promo we're going to see is Bob Armstrong, and he's not in liberty to be cutting promos per se right now. Next week we're going to hear from Tim Horner, which really is not something to get excited about, people. I'm sorry. Before we finish up this week, just to mention a couple of other things that happened this week in wrestling that I didn't get a chance to talk about. All Japan Pro Wrestling sold out their upcoming show at Budokan Hall, 15,900 people, without any matches being announced, which I get, in this day and age, like especially in the past 25 years, you rarely, if ever, saw any matches being announced in advance, and you get a lot of sellouts for shows when you don't even know what's going to happen. This was different and new at the time. After the demise of the Tri-State Wrestling Alliance, former financial partner Todd Gordon was said to be starting a new Philly-based group called Eastern Championship Wrestling. Jushin Liger suffered a quote-unquote serious rib injury, putting his match at the end of February with Brian Pillman at Super Brawl 2 into doubt, as I think we all remember, or if we haven't, you should need to go watch the match. That did not stop Jushin Liger. They had a fantastic match at Super Brawl 2, and was undoubtedly the highlight of the WCW light heavyweight title run from 91 to 92 there. And then Junkyard Dog is probably signing with WCW, which I wanted to make mention, if only because the main reason, one of the main reasons he was not in Smoky Mountain Wrestling was that Rick Rubin specifically mentioned him by name as somebody he did not want in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And so, poor Junkyard Dog, but looks like he's gonna get another run here in WCW. So that's gonna do it for now. Hopefully, if you listened, you enjoyed this. And just remember, by subscribing to Something Else with Arian, not KJ, you're automatically subscribing to this show too. They're going to run concurrently. You can listen to us on all of our channels, all of our networks: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and more. So check us out. Please subscribe to us. Leave us a 5-star review. And until we talk again next week with more Mid-South Wrestling, thank you all for listening, and have a great rest of your week. Hello and welcome to the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Re-Watch-Along Project. This is a production of the Something Else Podcasting Network. And of course, this is episode number 002 of Smoky Mountain Wrestling from February 8th, 1992, taped October 30th, 1991 in Greenville, South Carolina. My name is Aria. And hey, I guess episode 1 went well because, as promised, as threatened, I'm back here with episode 2. And here we are. In case you didn't listen to our last show, we are watching Smoky Mountain Wrestling starting from beginning to end. All 200 episodes, one at a time. And unlike our Mid-South show, where I just recap it for you after I've watched it. We are watching the shows beginning to end. It's a watch along show. If you pull up Smoky Mountain Wrestling, you can, I believe all the episodes are available on YouTube. You can watch along with me if you'd like. If not, you can just listen to my voice for this episode's 50 minutes and 52 seconds without commercials. So, I mean, it's a long one without ads. But, I'm going to be here and going through this whole thing with you. And just as a reminder, by subscribing to Something Else with Ari and Not KJ, you automatically get this show as well. You get our Smoky Mountain Re-Watch-Along Project along with the original weekly Something Else show that comes out every week. And you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Podbean, Castbox, Overcast, Pod Paradise, Castro, Podbay.fm, and Radio Public, in addition to tinyurl.com/somethingelsepod. So we got a long episode here, and so we're going to get things going here. Now, since I played the theme song to start the show, if you're going to pull up our show, or you're going to pull up the Smoky Mountain show to watch, start at 28 seconds, because that's after the theme song plays. So we're going to start with the intro with Bob Caudle and his guest host this week, Jim Cornette. And I'll be right back, and we're just going to keep watching from there, and I'll be back telling you what's going on as it's going on.
Hi, wrestling fans from Greenville, South Carolina's Memorial Auditorium. Welcome to another action-packed, exciting hour of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Wrestling the way it used to be and the way you like it. I'm Bob Caudle. This week we're going to be seeing Hollywood Bob Holly, Hustler Rip Rogers. We're going to see much, much more. We're going to be talking with... Hey.
You never get finished. Why don't
Jim
you go ahead and
Cornette, the Louisville Slugger, right here, fans.
I'll tell you what we're going to see today. We're going to see two main events. Dutch Mantell takes on Scott Armstrong, and the Fantastics going up against the Koloffs. I can hardly wait to see Hollywood Bob Holly in action. I've heard so much about him. But Fantastics, I know what they can do. But I tell you this, to the Fulton brothers, the Koloffs are out for blood in today's main event. I think they're going to get some. Bob, take it away.
All right, fans, it's going to be a great hour. You want to stay right here. You don't want to miss a single moment of it. And we're about ready to go. Let's go to the ring now and our opening match.
Now, in case you missed the show last week, this show and last week's show were both taped in October at an independent show being run by Bobby Fulton, where basically Jim Cornette brought in a lot of the undercard guys and the TV camera, and just be allowed to film it. And so last week's show was announced by Bob Caudle and Dutch Mantell. Since Dutch is wrestling this week, Jim Cornette fills in. And by and large, for the next 2 years, the announced team is Bob and Dutch. Spoiler alert. But let's jump in here now. As they mentioned, we're going to have two big matches here today. It's Dutch Mantell versus Scott Armstrong. And remember, Dutch has an issue with Primetime Brian Lee, and he stated that he's going to show Primetime Brian Lee how to wrestle. And here we go with this one. And then we have the Family Affair as the Fantastics, Bobby and Jackie Fulton, take on Ivan and Vladimir Koloff. That is our main event. And we go to the ring for our first match. If you're watching on YouTube, it's already underway. It's Tim Fry with Glitter Vest versus Hollywood Bob Holly with generic black jacket. Yes, this is the same Bob Holly who would go on to become Thurman Sparky Plug and Hardcore Holly. In his book, Bob talked about how he was working full-time at a real job, and it was difficult for him to get time off, and so he'd usually end up leaving his job, going hundreds of miles to go wrestle, and have to travel hundreds of miles back the next day in order to get back to work. And so he eventually had to choose one over the other, and it wasn't wrestling. Ron Wright's about to come back out, so let's Listen to this.
Wait a minute. Look at one of my friends at ringside.
Oh, no.
There's Ron Wright.
Yes, sir. Ron Wright, a legend in professional wrestling and now a top manager, I understand. Jim, what do you think? He may be down here scouting one of these guys?
I think that's exactly what he's doing because, you know, poor old Ron, his many years in professional wrestling have taken a toll on his body. He needs an operation. He's looking to make money, and he's got to have somebody to manage to make that money. He's probably scouting out Hollywood Bob Holly. I'll tell you one thing, Ron Wright has put more stitches in opponents' faces than Aunt Minnie puts in her homemade quilts.
Well, and that's why I keep saying, you know, how much sympathy can you have for a man like Ron Wright?
Now, Ron Wright's here, and I'll explain to him in just a minute. I'll finish up with Bob Holly first. Jim mentioned, and he's said this on his podcast before, that Bob Holly was one of those wrestlers that he really wanted. Unfortunately, he couldn't pay him enough to get him to quit his job. It wouldn't have been feasible. And of course, Bob ended up in the WWF a little under 2 years later. I think it was December of '93 is when he finally went. Now, Ron Wright, in case you weren't with us last week and you don't know who this gentleman is, he is a Southern wrestling legend. He wrestled most of his life in this Smoky Mountain area in Knoxville and Morristown and all that fun stuff. And nowadays meaning 1992, he is injured. He needs knee surgery. He needs hip surgery. But since he can't afford it, apparently doesn't have insurance, he needs to come here to Smoky Mountain Wrestling and find himself a wrestler to manage and to help him make some money so he can get his needed operations. Last week, he was out and he tried to assist Ivan Koloff in winning the main event by allegedly slipping him a foreign object. But it ended up being a reverse decision anyway. So we've established that even though this kindly older gentleman needs surgery and needs donations to help him out, he's actually a devious heel, and he may not actually be worthy of, the money needed for his operations. So Tim Fry is looking good here, and we remember last week that the Black Scorpion, lost to an enhancement talent, and so it is a regular thing here that, just because you're standing in the ring with no music doesn't mean that you can't pick up the win. Bob Holly at one point in this match has become the second person to use a leg drop, and it wasn't the finish of the match. And actually, Tim Fry just did a leg drop to the arm. And I have no proof that any of this is, to take a stab at Hulk Hogan. But, back in the 80s and early 90s, that was a thing that a lot of wrestling companies did, was to take a shot at Hogan. You'd have people hit the big leg drop and other wrestlers just kick out like it's nothing. Holly just slammed Tim Fry, and he's going up to the top rope. And let's see what he's going to do here. He hits a fantastic looking top rope knee drop. I can see why he doesn't keep using it, but that looked phenomenal. He drops a knee on Tim Fry and picks up the win here. Jim Cornette compared it to something Bobby Eaton would do. By the way, I should mention that Jim and Bob mentioned repeatedly that big-time Hollywood agents and casting directors are after Bob Holly. And after this big win here in Smoky Mountain, I'm sure that this will just open up all the agents, all the, everybody, all the directors will be calling Bob Holly right now. Let's go to an Ivan Koloff promo here in just a second.
Bobby Fulton, last week, yes, it was the end for your career, but your stupid brother had to come and stick his nose in the match. But you see, this week, we are going to finish it with my nephew, Vladimir. As you see, you think all you people out there that Nikita was awesome. Well, you take a look at Vladimir. He's got the same intent in his heart. We're going to rip you apart. Fantastic. Today will be the end of your career. Fantastic.
Now, I'll go over that here in just a second, but I'm going to leave this go through to the commercial that comes up next, along with the Robert Gibson promo, and come back to talk about
If
both.
you'd like to raise money for your school, club, or civic organization, and you'd like to see the excitement of Smoky Mountain Wrestling live in your hometown, this message is for you. High school and college athletic departments, sports teams, police and fire departments, JCs, civic groups, or any group wishing to raise money can bring the stars of Smoky Mountain Wrestling to town for a night of action and receive a portion of the receipt. Write to us or call Sandy Scott at 703-989-6819. Smoky Mountain Wrestling and your civic group, an unbeatable tag team.
We had an opportunity to tape some comments from rock and roll Robert Gibson. Right now, let's hear what Robert had to say about Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
You know, it's a pleasure to be out here now with Smoky Mountain Wrestling. They gave me the opportunity to come out here and say hello to all the nice fans around the country. Let me say one thing. You know, I've been out for a while. I had a serious knee surgery. I've been out for like 9 months. Now I'm back. I'm ready to prove to the world I'm back here and ready to come back to wrestle. I like to say one thing. If all the fans out there can stick behind the rock and roll will never die. See ya.
All righty, so let's rewind a little bit first to the Ivan Koloff promo, building up the tag team main event with the Fantastics. Vladimir Koloff, by the way, who is the same guy who wrestles Vladimir Petrov for a little bit in 1987 after Nikita turned babyface. He bears a very strong resemblance to Nikita. It's like, honestly, if you didn't know any better and you just took 1 or 2 quick glances at him, you would think it was Nikita, just a little bit hairier version of him. Then we see a commercial that gets played a lot in Smoky Mountain. It's, you know, the commercial where they said, you know, if your club, civic organization, high school, church group, whatever, wants to fundraise, you know, use Smoky Mountain Wrestling as a fundraiser, we'll give you a portion of the receipts, all that fun stuff. And, you know, that's, first of all, it's what a lot of local territories did in the day, you know, to try to raise some money here. They did a lot of fundraising efforts with your local civic group. It's why in a lot of those local indie shows you would see, you know, they would bring these local person into the ring and donate a check of some degree to them, to their civic organization or group or club or whatever. But the reason why I specifically wanted to mention it is because while they're talking about the family-friendly wrestling that you can see here with Smoky Mountain Wrestling, the very first thing that you see in this commercial is the angle from last week where the Koloffs hang Bobby Fulton over the top rope. I can see church groups and civic organizations all over Tennessee jumping out of their seats and going, hey, we need that in our church. We need that in our local gymnasium. We want Russians hanging wrestlers over the top rope. And I'm not even going to make the comment that, you know, the Fultons are white and, you know, oh, I guess I just did. Oh, well, then we had a Robert Gibson promo, which, to be honest, was just there, you know, to give a baby face some promo time. And we are going to have some baby faces with promo time on this show. So while I was talking about that, if you're following along on YouTube, you'll see our next match is in the ring. It is Hustler Rip Rogers versus Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. Orndorff, at this point, by far the biggest star in the company, easily the biggest star in the company. Both men followed the Terry Taylor rule of wearing a fancy robe to the ring. And after the bell rang, they both spent a good minute just taking off their jackets. And Orndorff, he's babyface to the crowd, which makes sense because he is the biggest star that we've seen. And, you know, especially in this day and age when, you know, we're just getting started, we haven't yet established anybody truly as a face or heel, or we're just starting to establish them as faces and heels. You know, since we haven't really done anything for Orndorff, it makes sense that, you know, the crowd pops for the big former WWF WrestleMania main eventer. They fought outside the ring. Orndorff hit Rogers with a microphone, which was not a disqualification. Corny pointed out that Bob Armstrong's treating this like the NBA, where referees in the NBA are no blood, no foul, which may have been the case in 1992, especially, and I mean, it really was, especially when you watch some of the crazy stuff, you know, from back in the day. But that is definitely not the way the NBA is in 2023. In fact, I got a personal foul just because I looked at LeBron James the wrong way. and I don't even play the game. Um, Orndorff is giving Rogers a lot more than you'd expect, especially considering their respective star power here. They're fighting outside the ring again here. Rogers just threw Orndorff into the guardrail a couple times. And yeah, so this match is just going. And much like last week, we do have I do have a list of things to talk about for when there's maybe nothing to talk about here this week in wrestling. And what's going on in the rest of the wrestling world. And the big thing that came out was that the state of Florida was originally considering regulating professional wrestling, and then they got voted down. So new WCW Executive Vice President Kip Fry announced that they would be starting an anti-steroid policy in basically following on to WWF's anti-steroid policy. Rip Rogers, by the way, just locked on a sleeper hold in the ring. And Orndorff is going out here. Spoiler alert, he's not going to. Famous story came out of this, and I mean, again, throw allegedly on this because I wasn't there when it happened. But allegedly, Sting went to Kip Fry and asked how legitimate the steroid policy would be, because if it was, he would get off. And he was told it was legitimate. So Sting got off steroids, and then a few months later, whatever happened, and, well, Sting did whatever he was going to do. So Orndorff just ran into the turnbuckle here, and, he ducked when he ran in, so Rip Rogers went face first into the turnbuckle, and he, with a schoolboy, Orndorff doesn't pick up the win. It was a 1 count. And let's see, Rip Rogers going for the big suplex. Nope, that was blocked. Orndorff hits a big suplex. And these two are just going at it here. Orndorff with a big running knee to the face of Rip Rogers. This match longer than your average job match. And I mean, they have an hour to fill. And I mean, you can only tape so many enhancement matches in front of a crowd before they die. And yeah, so this one is just continuing to go on and on here. They're in Greenville, South Carolina, at the Greenville Memorial Coliseum. No idea on what the attendance is. Based on the crowd, I'd say it's about 250. Rip Rogers is going for a pile driver. Now, the pile driver in Smoky Mountain is illegal. This is the first time we've seen it. So if Rip Rogers would have done it, he would have been disqualified. But Orndorff backdrops and sits forward on the sunset flip attempt by Rogers and picks up the win. So yes, just letting you know, this is going to become a big deal here. The pile driver is a banned move in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And in just a few seconds here, we're going to be joined by Bullet Bob Armstrong with some big news. Can't wait to see what that big news is. But right now, we're getting a replay of it. Orndorff backdrops out of the pile driver, sits down on a sunset flip attempt. Think Owen Hart and Tatanka at King of the Ring 1994, and picks up the win. Let's go now to Bullet Bob.
Wrestling fans, we want to invite you to continue watching each week right here on this station, Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Wrestling the way it used to be and wrestling the way you like it. The big news, of course, is that very soon, Smoky Mountain Wrestling will be coming live to your town. And you'll be seeing such outstanding stars as this man right here next to me, Nitro and Danny Davis. Danny?
Thank you very much for the introduction. You know, I am proud to be associated with Smoky Mountain Wrestling because it's been a long time since I've been in the area. It's also been a long time since the wrestling fans around here have seen live wrestling. And it's like you said, there's nothing like live wrestling. So whenever Smoky Mountain Wrestling comes out, come out and see us. I'm looking forward to seeing all my friends from the past because for years, many years ago, I was a name here. Most fans remember me as Nightmare Danny Davis, but that's a thing in the past because now it's Nitro Danny Davis because just like a bottle of nitroglycerin, you get too close and shake me up, I'm going to explode on you.
One of the many stars of Smoky Mountain Wrestling fans, Nitro Danny Davis. Now let's talk with the commissioner of Smoky Mountain Wrestling, Mr. Bob Armstrong. Bob?
Bob, it's good to be with you. I've got a list right here of some of the top wrestlers in the country and another list back here of some that negotiations are going on with as we speak. What Smoky Mountain is trying to do is bring the sport of wrestling back as a family feature, something you can bring your children out to enjoy and not be ashamed of at affordable prices. Some things have gotten out of context. I'm not going to allow any breakage of the rules, no pile drivers over the top ropes. You know all the things we've gone over. I've gone over it with the wrestlers, and fines are going to be handed out. Fines are going to be levied on anybody that breaks the rules. So we will try to make it a family affair, like I say, and like you've been talking about, it's much more fun to watch professional wrestling in person. TV matches are great, and we've had some great TV matches, good tournaments to come, but if you take my word for it, Smoky Mountain Wrestling is a place to be. Come out and see us when we come to your town, and come see us in person.
All right, and I apologize, it wasn't Bob Armstrong, it was Bob Caudle. I just wrote Bob has big news, which, but I'm going to come back in just a second because Primetime Brian Lee's about to get a promo, and we're going to go to that here in just a second.
Fans, here's a young man that's bringing a lot of excitement to Smoky Mountain Wrestling. We're delighted to have him, Primetime Brian Lee. Brian?
You know, Bob, Dutch Mantell come up here and run his mouth. You know, it's easy to sit behind the desk and criticize somebody. Dutch, I'm 6'5", 285 pounds, and not hard to find, and can't hide behind much. So if you got a problem with me, I can settle anytime, anywhere.
All right, and that's the message, fans. It looks like you're sending that right to Dutch Mantell, Brian.
You're exactly right. Dutch Mantell and any other takers.
All right, fans, we say this young man has wrestled, well, he's wrestled in Puerto Rico, he's wrestled in Japan, he's wrestled all around the world, and he's going to have a big impact on Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Primetime Brian Lee, don't forget that name.
All right, so as we get ready for the next match, which is Dutch Mantell versus Scott Armstrong, we're going to rewind a bit to what we just heard. So Bob Caudle's big news is that soon Smoky Mountain Wrestling will be coming to the towns in your area. And yeah, there are too many Bobs in this company. We have Bob Caudle, Bob Hawley, Bob Armstrong. I really need to stop just saying Bob when I'm talking about Bob. So they interviewed first, and these were localized promos, but they had nothing really to plug at this point. The first was with Nitro Danny Davis, who is the same Danny Davis who would own and operate OVW with Jim Cornette a few years later. And the story behind this, and it's on Jim Cornette's YouTube page if you want to go and listen to this, was they were trying to differentiate themselves from WWF and WCW. And at this point, especially the WWF had tons of wrestlers with face paint. And when Jim Cornette and Rick Rubin were talking about ways to differentiate them from WWF and WCW, one of the ways, in addition to not having Junkyard Dog on the show, one of the ways was to not have wrestlers with face paint. So Danny Davis, who, as Nightmare Danny Davis, he would paint his face up a bit. He was told no face paint. So instead of being Nightmare, he's now Nitro Danny Davis. Then we had Bob Armstrong, who reiterated the rules of Smoky Mountain Wrestling and said he wanted this to be a family affair, like how they hung Jackie Fulton last week. That is some family-friendly entertainment. After that, we had that Brian Lee promo, which it was rough. And I think I said this last week, the better promos are definitely the heels in this company here for the most part here, because Bob Armstrong's a great promo. Everybody else at the moment is not so much. And I mean, you're not going to become a great promo without practice. And we're getting some practice right here on television. And by the way, last week he was 6'6". This week he's 6'5", so he shrunk an inch since we last spoke with him. And ultimately, though, he wants to shut Dutch up. And speaking of Dutch, we have Dutch Mantell versus Scott Armstrong. Dutch wrestles a little bit for Smoky Mountain. In fact, a lot of his matches were on house shows and live events. But mostly when we see him here, he's going to be doing a lot of commentary for the most part. During this match, Bob and Jim wonder where Oil Trough, Texas is. That's where Dutch Mantell's kayfabe hometown is. They do mention that while Dutch is a veteran, not only is Scott a veteran, but he's also a second-generation wrestler, the son of Bullet Bob, and would go on to have a run in WCW. But honestly, most people, especially these days, know him as a referee in both WWE and TNA's early days. Scott's brother Steve, at this point, is currently in WCW and is actually just coming back from knee surgery. that he had, and he's teaming with Tracy Smothers, which is another person we're going to see in a few months or so. Right now, Dutch Mantell's got the microtundo abdominal stretch on, where he's close enough to the ropes that he grabs it for leverage, and he gets caught, but the referee doesn't do the, shoving him out of the way. But yeah, he breaks it anyway. Scott got a near fall off a small package and just threw a beautiful drop kick, but missed it by a mile. So now Dutch is on him. By the way, Dutch pushed the referee, which in theory should be a fine, but probably isn't going to be because, at this point, they're not being terribly consistent with some of the rules. They probably should be here, but it is what it is, I guess. Dutch locking on the arm bar here. And not a whole lot happening with the arm bar. Scott is fighting up with a big punch to the face. Another big punch to the face. A third big punch to the face. Ooh, a fourth one. We're cooking with gas here, but Dutch yanks him down by his hair. The referee's like, "Hey, did you pull this hair?" And Dutch is like, "No, man, I didn't pull no hair. I know what you're talking about." Dutch punched Scott, and Scott went tumbling out to the floor. Cornette, by the way, it says that it couldn't have hurt because the floor broke his fall. The floor, which there's no padding on, so it's comedy. And we're back in the ring. Dutch goes for a big back body drop, but gets kicked in the face. And we got Scott doing his fiery comeback, complete with punches, because, yeah, we do love the punch here in Southern Wrestling. And Dutch, oh my God, Dutch has got his bullwhip. Oh my God, Dutch just attacked Scott Armstrong with a bullwhip and has gotten himself disqualified here. Oh my God, the humanity. He's whipping at Scott. And here comes primetime Brian Lee with a giant piece of wood, a giant broomstick to save Scott Armstrong. And Dutch bails to the floor. It looks like he's about to grab the mic and say something here.
Scott Armstrong is your winner.
On a disqualification. Wait a minute, Dutch has got...
Hey, Brian Lee, let me tell you one thing. You stick your nose where it don't belong. This whip, I'll stop a 2,000-pound bull. And you keep messing with me, I'll whoop 75 pounds right off you, brother.
Oh, there you have it, Bob. He's not going to take this abuse.
That's what the Dutch Mantell says, and fans will be back. Right now, let's take time out for this.
Fans with me right now is Mr. Jerry Williams, who's principal of Morristown, Tennessee's East High School. And Jerry, recently you had a Smoky Mountain event in your school.
Bob, yes we did. Had a great turnout of fans. I'll tell you what, Smoky Mountain Wrestling brought top-notch wrestlers into the area. We had a great time, and I'll tell you, these people are easy to work with, and I'd recommend if they bring them into their school, if they need to raise some funds. The East High baseball team is taking advantage of this situation.
Fans, you can get all the information by writing to the address on your screen right now about Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
Fans with me right now, Smoky Mountain Commissioner Bob Armstrong. Bob, again, it appeared to me, and I think all of the fans, we call it Dutch Mantell, he used a foreign object in the ring.
Well, he's used his whip, and we'll say he tried to get around the foreign object clause. But he can bring that whip to the ring if he wants to, if that's part of his paraphernalia. But if he uses that whip, it's going to cost him $500 the first time, and we'll see what happens after that. Now, still talking, as long as we're on the subject of Dutch Mantell, he seems to have a problem with Brian Lee. So we here at Smoky Mountain can settle that problem. Next week right here on TV, we'll put Dutch Mantell against primetime Brian Lee next week.
Fans, that should solve that problem. Wait a minute. What, you don't approve of that?
What, Commissioner Gordon over here got to stick his nose in everybody's business? I would pay that fine just for the privilege of seeing Scott Armstrong get bullwhipped. Now, I'll tell you something else while we're on the subject. of people wanting to know other people's business. Everybody's been asking me, Jim Cornette, who's this tag team you're bringing? Yeah. Who's coming to Smoky Mountain Wrestling? Who's this dynamic new team? Well, nobody's going to know until I'm ready. And when I'm ready is going to be when they decide champions around here, because that's exactly what these two guys are going to be. You see, I've been in some of these other organizations. I know how it works. You want to get a wrestling match maybe up a little higher on the card? No way. You go in there and say, I want to be in a main event. They say, no, you're not selling enough bubblegum cards. You go in there and say, I want a little more money. We can't pay you no more money. This guy's got a contract selling tennis shoes. We got to pay him. You want a title shot? Worst of all, they say, we ain't going to give you no title shot, because you might beat that guy and take his title, and he just signed a contract to be on an episode of a situation comedy. So you see the problem in other wrestling organizations. Around here, brother, the way that you become a champion is by winning a lot of matches. The way you win a lot of matches is by having more guts in your belly than the guy you're standing across from. And when you get that title match, the only thing between you and that belt is whether you're bigger and better and tougher than the guy that wears the gold. My men are going straight to the top, and ain't nobody going to stand in our way. And if these rednecks like it, that's fine with me. If they don't, I could care less.
Something we're going to look forward to in the near future. Who is that team? And we'll be back right after this.
All right, so we got a 30-second break before our next interview. So to rewind a little bit and talk, we heard Dutch Mantel. He threatened to whip 75 pounds off of primetime Brian Lee. By the way, they're currently airing that Civic Group commercial, which does include Dutch Mantel whipping Scott Armstrong. So not only can you see hanging if you bring the kids to the show, if you bring them to Smoky Mountain to your church, you also get whipping. And for now, let's go back to Bob.
Fans, with me right now, Mr. Wally Yamaguchi of Power Channel Television, Cable Television of Japan, and Universal Wrestling of Japan, who is here to scout the talent and also understand, to look and think about exchanging some of our television programs.
Yes, Bob, I'm very pleased that I'm at the Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and we're here to try to televise in the future moment, and we like to exchange talent, and I'm having fun, and this is our logo, and this is my boy from Tokyo, and we're all here from Tokyo, and let's put the Smoky Mountain Wrestling worldwide international.
Hey, yeah,
okay?
maybe we'll be seen shortly in Japan then.
Sure.
Well, and good luck.
We're very pleased that you're here, and you should be a pride that you're in one of this program of Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
All right, thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to have you here with us. Fans, before we have tonight's main event, let's go back and look at what happened last week in the match between Ivan Koloff and Bobby Fulton. And I want you to pay particular attention to what happened at the end of the match after the match was over. Right now, let's go back and see that.
All right, so while they air what happened last week, we got about 90 seconds, 2 minutes before they come back. By the way, before I rewind too far back, yes, that was the same Wally Yamaguchi who managed Kaientai in the WWF in 1998. He was the one who said choppy pee pee and all that fun stuff. But before we talk about him and the fact that just aired on television, let's rewind 5 minutes to another thing that you can't believe aired on television. Jerry Williams, the principal of East High School, talking about the recent show Smoky Mountain did at East High School, which was actually the next set of TV tapings that's going to air starting next week. And he was not the worst promo on the show. You know, spoiler alert for something coming up a little bit later. But, I mean, it was funny because they put in big stupid letters, the principal, in quotation marks, like it was his gimmick name, the principal. We then got a quick interview with Bullet Bob Armstrong, where he finds Dutch Mantel $500. Actually, I'm not even sure, did he actually find Dutch $500? Because he said that, you know, he would do that if he were to whip somebody, and he did whip somebody. He whipped Scott Armstrong. So I'm assuming Dutch got fined, but it's kind of very ambiguous here. And we'll get into Jim Cornette's here in just a second, because right now the Russians are hanging Jackie Fulton last week. And now let's go to more with Jim Cornette. Exactly.
That is the greatest thing that I've ever seen in my life. Those Fantastics finally got what was coming to them. I hate a couple of bleach blonde stinking punks like the Fantastics.
Jim, they tried to hang Jackie right there, and I think he would have still
Should've
been hanging there.
Should be
if
hung.
somebody hadn't come to the rescue. They ended it out about that. Well, shortly after that, at the end of the program, Commissioner Bob Armstrong, he came
Stuck his
over,
nose in.
he joined the Fantastics, and they had a discussion about this. Now, let's hear what they had to say about what happened.
Fans, what a wild, chaotic.
And so they're showing the post-match from last week where Bob Armstrong booked this week's tag team match, and then Bobby Fulton cut a fiery babyface promo. But while that's going on, let's rewind again to Jim Cornette's promo that we heard, talking about his tag team. He talks about championships in SMW, and specifically he's talking about, how the differences between Smoky Mountain and other companies, because, in WWF and WCW, they tend to spend most of their time catering to the higher priced talent. So even if the lower priced talent is more talented, they, tend to worry about that. And he claims here in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, it's more about, without actually saying, hey, this is fake, we're putting the talented wrestlers over. He's basically saying, hey, you're going to get title shots if you're talented and win your matches. And the people who have the most talent are going to win the championships. And maybe essentially it's what he's saying here. And then we had that promo with Wally Yamaguchi, and I got about 30 seconds before we have a Ron Wright promo. But yes, I'm kind of, sitting here thinking of all the things to air on episode 2 of Smoky Mountain. We're getting an interview with Wally Yamaguchi, who, if you don't know, he was a cameraman, a well-known cameraman who would take pictures for the magazines and newspapers in Japan. And, they had him here for some reason. They don't show who the young boy is he's got with them. He just has his back to the camera, and you see the logo on a jacket. Let's go back to the audio here.
He maintained his innocence through all of this. So before we went on the air today, he had these comments. Let's hear them.
Let me tell you something, Fantastics. I don't know what you're all upset over, accusing Ron Wright of getting down there and trying to give that man something. Ron Wright is a crippled man. I'm in a wheelchair. All I'm doing is coming around here looking at the talent that Smoky Mountain has, and believe me, brother, they have plenty of it. And Ron Wright has never harmed a hair on any man in my opponents in my life. Just poor old crippled man sitting here trying to mind my own business, looking at what's going on here in this Smoky Mountain Wrestling Empire, and I may get me a team or a man that I may sign up under a contract to manage that can make me a lot of money to have my hip surgery.
All right, so yeah, we're still talking about Wally Yamaguchi here, and we're this is a new show. I'm gonna eventually be able to catch up with some of this stuff here, but yeah, they're airing the of your civic group or organization. By the way, it should be noted, and we're at the main event here, so I'm not spoiling anything yet, but the finish of the main event is in the commercial for that they've aired 3 times already on this show, about your local civic organization can be a great partner for Smoky Mountain Wrestling. But anyway, so yeah, for whatever reason, we had to have that promo with Wally Yamaguchi for some reason. And it's hilarious because for a company that was never going to expand, and Jim Cornette has been very adamant about that, no matter how much success they may have had, in the future, they were never going to expand out of, the Smoky Mountain region, of, Tennessee and North Carolina and, that area here. But it's weird that here on the second show, we have a promo where they talk about potentially airing Smoky Mountain in Japan, which is just hilarious. After they showed the videos of what happened last week, we heard Jim Cornette call the Fantastics bleach blonde stinking punks and how much he hates bleach blonde stinking punks. Honestly, I think most of the Smoky Mountain babyface roster at this point is blonde. And that's kind of what's hilarious about all this. Ron Wright, Mr. Ron Wright, is one of the stars of the show. We're going to hear him over the next couple of years. And he is still at this. He is an innocent man. He was not slipping a foreign object to Ivan Koloff last week. He was just going up to shake his hand as is, a gentleman wrestler that he was. And he just wants to get a wrestler to help him, pay for his hip and knee operations. And how dare any of us accuse him of doing something else? So then we have our main event, the Koloffs versus the Fantastics. This match has a 1-hour time limit. Spoiler alert, it will only feel like it goes an hour. I mentioned earlier, Vladimir Koloff does bear a striking resemblance to Nikita Koloff. If only he matched Nikita Koloff's skill. And I mean, there's some people laughing because Nikita Koloff wasn't exactly the best wrestler in the world, but Nikita picked up on certain things pretty quickly, and he was loads better than Vladimir ever was. And, Ivan at this point, he was WWF champion 31 years before this. So, he's no spring chicken here. I should actually look up, see how old he was at this point. Let's see. Oh, lordy. So it'd be good to look up these things now before we are on here. So he was born August 25th, 1942. So when this match was taped, and actually when this match aired, he was 49 years old, and actually I said 30 years earlier he was the WWF champion. It was 20 years earlier. So, I'm sorry, Ivan, he passed away in 2017. I'm dating the poor guy here. Cottle, one second here. Bob and Jim debated whether Bob Cottle and Jim debate whether or not Bob Armstrong would force the rules fairly. Vladimir, as I mentioned earlier, same guy as Vladimir Petrov, who was in JCP for a couple months in '87 once Nikita turned babyface. Cottle at one point asks what 250 kilos was, because that's what the Russians are introduced as, a combined weight of 250 kilos. Jim replies, 15 to 20 years in prison, which just pops Bob Cottle. And honestly, it popped me when he said it too. Speaking of the Koloff family, Nikita actually just re-signed with WCW this week in 1992. And he would actually be there for most of 92 until he gets injured in a match with Vader, actually. Because he was a babyface. He was a part of War Games, that great War Games 92 match with Sting Squadron and Dangerous Alliance. And, WCW 92 had a lot of really good wrestlers, or at the very least, a lot of really good young talent who become really good wrestlers. It's just that's not what you remember from WCW 1992. You remember the worst of it. And they gave you a lot of the worst of it. Jackie is in the ring and he's getting the heat, and he's selling great for both Russians, and actually is doing a fantastic job of making Vladimir look like a kick-ass heel here. And Vladimir, and here's the thing, the Koloffs I don't believe last long here either. I think this might be a one and done type situation for them, or maybe they're here a couple more weeks, but either way, don't get used to the Koloffs here in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. This match, much like I mentioned with the Orndorff match earlier, this match is going a long time. And, at least with Orndorff and Hustler Rick Rogers, both men were equal skill level and equal footing. This one, Vladimir Koloff, even though he's been wrestling for at least 5 years at this point, he's still pretty green. And, and sometimes like this, it's like, because you saw how great the Road Warriors were, and Nikita Koloff did a fantastic job, and it makes it look almost too easy, and then you get people like Vladimir Koloff, will remind you that, hey, just because they lucked out with, 3 guys doesn't mean that, this is as easy as it looks here, people. And they're just going on here. They're continuing to get the heat on Jackie. And by the way, elsewhere in the wrestling world this week, we talked about the drug testing that was going to start in WCW soon. Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer passed away this week. He was 32 years old. Buzz, honestly, I never saw a lot of Buzz Sawyer, but a little bit I did see. He was always really good. By the way, Jackie just did a sunset flip on Vladimir, but the referee's back was turned and no count there. And they're doing, at the end of the day, they're doing a great job of keeping their babyface in the heel corner. This isn't a 5-star match. It wasn't supposed to be a 5-star match, but it is a great old school tag team match. And this was the type of wrestling that they wanted to have in this company. And, this is definitely not a match that you're going to see in the WWF at this point. It certainly wasn't a match you were going to see in WCW at the point. And even though WCW had, a much better tag team division at this point, or at least in my mind they did. Because they had, I think Anderson and Zbyszko were the champions. They had Ricky Steamboat, and Dustin Rhodes. They had the Steiner brothers. They had a lot of really good teams in WCW at this point. But it's like, even then, I don't know. It's not this. This is a match that you could have seen on NWA Worldwide when we were talking about that in 1985, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. By the way, speaking of WWF and tag teams, the Legion of Doom just lost the WWF Tag Team Championship to the newly formed team of Money Incorporated, Ted DiBiase and IRS this week in wrestling. And, whatever happened. And they were supposed to, I guess, they were building to a rematch at WrestleMania, which, we know never happened. They did wrestle at SummerSlam, which was actually Hawk's last match in the WWF until 97, I believe. Jackie Fulton just made the hot tag to Bobby Fulton. And, one of those things that, always happens with, these tag team matches that, kind of drive me crazy. And we're going to get that here in a second, where you had the babyface, he got beat down for, over 5 minutes here, and give him 10 seconds of rest, and now he's on his feet, and we got a big 4-person, 4-way brawl. And let's see here, Ivan just dumped Bobby outside the ring, and now they're beating on Jackie again. Bobby to the top rope. There's a flying crossbody block. Actually, I think that's Jackie did the flying crossbody on Ivan and picks up the win. Not sure the legal man was here. In fact, I don't think, the legal man got the pin. But the fans who were mad for most of the match really got into the finish as the Fultons, the Fantastics, pick up the big win here over the Russians in a match that went longer than 10 minutes. It wasn't an hour, and like I said, sometimes it felt like an hour, but this was exactly what the fans wanted, at least the finish the fans really wanted here. And hooray! So the fans go home happy with our main event of the second show. And I'm going to be happy because we're going to talk to Jim Cornette here in just a second. And let's go down to that promo.
Wrestling fans, remember, for the best in action and excitement, be sure you watch each week right here on this station for Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Wrestling the way it used to be, wrestling the way you like it. A number of outstanding stars, and we'll be letting you meet one of them in just a moment. In addition, we also have tremendous and great managers. One of them right here, Jim Cornette.
Are you trying to insinuate I'm not a tremendous and great star? We'll meet one of them in a minute, but first, here's Jim Cornette. Let me tell you something. You know, we're coming back with live professional wrestling in all the towns in the Smoky Mountain Wrestling area. You know what that's like? An albatross. That's a big ugly bird that hangs around your neck bringing doom and destruction everywhere it goes. That's what going to these redneck hillbilly towns is to me, and Albatross. I'm calling Bob Armstrong. I ain't going to these stinking towns.
Speaking of Stars fans, one of the greatest ever in professional wrestling right here, and here he is. All the wrestling fans around the country know this man, Terry Bam Bam Gordy.
Well,
Terry?
that's right. You know, it's like this. I've been from Freebird Mountain all around the world. I've been from Freebird Mountain to Tokyo, Japan. I've been from Freebird Mountain, like I said, all around the world, but this is the first time I ever came from Freebird Mountain to the Smoky Mountains. Right here I am. I'm ready to take. The bombs are starting to fall. Can you hear? Get out! Get out! Get out! Get out! The bombs are starting to fall. And I'm going to be the one that drops the biggest bomb of all right there in your town, wherever the Smoky Mountain Wrestling goes. And I'll guarantee you this, the skies over your town is going to be illuminated.
All right, so I don't have much time before we come back with a Tim Horner promo, but that was just fantastic from Jim Cornette, bashing Bob Cottle's introduction to Terry Gordy's entire promo, talking about coming down from Freebird Mountain. And now, to put you to sleep, here's Tim Horner.
Fans, right now we're talking to Morristown, Tennessee's own White Lightning, Tim Horner. Tim, I know you had a very successful tour in Japan, but I also know that you're glad to be back here on Smoky Mountain Wrestling, back before the home folks and in your own area and territory.
That's right. You know, when I come home, you know, I think of mountains because there's mountains all around us. And when I think of mountains, I think of Smoky Mountains. And now every time I hear Smoky Mountains, it's Smoky Mountain Wrestling. You know, and I really get excited about that because finally there's an organization who is going to allow the wrestlers to compete at a level that they're capable of competing in. You know, some of these other organizations, you know, and I talked to the commissioner earlier today, Bob Armstrong.
Right.
He assured me that Smoky Mountain Wrestling is not a body competition. It's not body, what is
building,
body
muscle,
building. There
right.
you go. And it's certainly not a rock show. You know, some of these other organizations, you know, they want to hammer something into the people's head, if you get my drift. But, you know, I'm happy to be here, you know, and like you said, I just come off a tour of Japan, and I'm really happy to be here.
Fans, that's it from White Lightning, Tim Horner. Next week, Dutch Mantell, Brian Lee. That's our main event. We'll see you then, and until then, so long for now.
Poor Tim. Poor us. Why did we have to end the show with Tim freaking Horner? And just giving a heads up, this is not a one-off by Tim Horner. We're going to listen to him many more times between now and time. If you think me ripping on Ed Wiskowski is bad, you know, keep in mind, I never have to listen to Ed Wiskowski talk. Tim Horner is going to be blabbermouthing, you know, for years and not be able to string together an entire sentence. We managed to somehow avoid, you know, listening to him for 2 full episodes, but he sneaks in here at the end with a minute-long promo. To give him some credits, the first 20 seconds was fine, relatively speaking. Maybe he should have kept his promo to 20 seconds, but instead he kept going. He couldn't remember the word bodybuilding. It's just this is Tim Horner at his promo best. And honestly, it's like, you know, I think of Paul Heyman, accentuate the positives, hide the negatives. Tim Horner, we talked about it last week. He's a pretty good wrestler, you know, so let's spend more time with him wrestling. Let's hide what he can't do, and what he can't do is cut a promo, you know. And this is where the Paul Heyman soundbite thing would work great for him, probably, because I bet Paul Heyman could have taken that 20 seconds that wasn't awful and found a way to edit it to make it look decent. But instead, we got this, and he starts talking about other companies hammering stuff into people's heads. Was he trying to make a steroid reference? Maybe. That's my best guess. boy. So that's the second show. Despite the last 60 seconds, I do believe that the promos for this show were better than the promos in the last show. But the wrestling is probably equal or lower since that long main event got even longer the longer we're on here. So I would honestly say that this week's show is about as good as last week's show, for whatever that's worth. But, things are going to pick up. Next week is our first actual dedicated TV taping that we're going to be talking about. Also, the one last thing I want to mention about what else is happening this week in wrestling. We mentioned the WrestleMania 8 main events that were booked already. Well, Sid officially turned heel this week. Undertaker officially turned babyface, and they are on the road to WrestleMania. In fact, Undertaker doesn't turn heel again for over 6 years. But that'll do it for our Smoky Mountain Re-Watch-Along episode this week. I want to thank everyone for listening. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I'll talk to you again next week. Hello and welcome to the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Re-Watch-Along Project. This is podcasting the way it used to be and the way you like it. This is a production of the Something Else Podcasting Network, and it is episode number 003 of Smoky Mountain Wrestling from February 15th, 1992, taped November 27th, 1991, in Morristown, Tennessee at East High School. And my name is Aria. Thank you all for listening. In case this is your first listen to the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Re-Watch-Along Project, what we do here is we watch an episode of Smoky Mountain Wrestling from the beginning. We're at episode number 3 now. And unlike our Mid-South show that I primarily do at the beginning of the week, this show is, we watch along, we do commentary as we're going along, and you can follow along by pulling up the show on YouTube and follow along by watching through there. We play the promos along with any other relevant audio that we might come across, and we go from there. Now we're going to jump right in here. By the way, just a reminder, if you subscribe to Something Else with Ari and not KJ, you automatically get this podcast, the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Re-Watch-Along Project, along with it every single week. So please consider subscribing, give us a listen, and, we'll have some fun together. So let's dive right in here. In case you're paying attention, we're going to start at the 30-second mark because I already played the intro audio at the beginning. And we're going to start with an intro with Bob Caudle and his co-announcer this week, Jim Cornette. And we'll get into all the reasons for that here once we finish up.
Hi, wrestling fans from Morristown, Tennessee's East High School. I'm Bob Caudle, and we've got a great action-packed hour for all you fans. During this hour, you're going to see Hollywood Bob Holly in action. Rock and roll Robert Gibson's going to be here. And Morristown's own White Lightning, Tim Horner. Dutch Mantell, primetime Brian Lee's going to be our main event. We're going to be talking with Ron Wright, Mr. Ron Wright, that is, the top manager. We're going to find out from Ivan Koloff who his new partner's going to be. And right here with me to help me call all the action, the Louisville Slugger. Say hello to Jim Cornette, fans.
Yeah, a bunch of hillbillies. They're a bunch of hillbillies. Let me say one thing. I'm looking forward to seeing Hollywood Bob Holly because he is hotter than ever. And I'm also looking forward to finding out who Ivan Koloff's new tag team partner is. But right there in the ring, in the main event today, Brian Lee and Dutch Mantell, prime time, you are going to get canceled yourself on today's program.
All right, fans, let's go to the ring for action.
Alrighty, so as you heard, today's main event is going to be Dutch Mantel versus Primetime Brian Lee, which is the reason why Dutch isn't doing commentary here. Dutch does do commentary for most of the next 2 years, and obviously doesn't when he's wrestling. The one thing I did want to note here, they have improved the announcer area from the background. Before, I believe they were just using the random background of the arena they were in last time. This time they have black drapes in the background, black curtains with the Smoky Mountain logo on them. So it's a step up. One other thing with production, and we see this next week as well, for some reason, I guess they just didn't get a good shot of the crowd during the intros cheering, because instead we get a still shot of the crowd with, the Smoky Mountain Wrestling welcoming lettering on the screen. And so then we go to our first match. It is Pat Rose one-on-one with Hollywood Bob Holly. Another difference between last week. Last week we had an actual curtain and a faux little entryway. This week, no curtain, and everyone just enters through a door off to the side, which is a big step down in, look-wise anyway. So here we have Bob Holly versus Pat Rose. Now, in case you haven't listened to me before, we do run down other stuff happening in the world of professional wrestling when it's slow. But before we get to that, let's play a little bit of audio coming up right now.
Well, he's a bodybuilder too, Jim, as well as an outstanding wrestler. Say he's in training for the Mr. Alabama contest.
That's right. He said he's going to go to all the southern states, and one by one he's going to win all the bodybuilding championships, he's going to win all the wrestling championships, and he's going to go back out to California, put his feet up, sip one of those margaritas, one of those drinks with the umbrella in it, and have a good time.
Now, in case you're confused, this is in fact the same Bob Holly from WWF. Sorry about the audio problem there. This is the same Bob Holly from the WWF. He is not, he's in good shape. He looks decent, but he's not, in bodybuilder shape. I don't think anyone would, confuse Bob Holly with somebody who looked like that. So much like how he's a big Hollywood movie star, but wears a cheap-looking satin jacket to the ring. Here we have Bob Holly, the bodybuilder, looking like, a in-shape, athletic-looking Bob Holly. And he's not jacked up and juiced up. And, maybe this is him on the juice, but, when you think about bodybuilders, the first person you think of is not Bob Holly. So, this is a fun little match here. Rose is showing speed. He hits a series of arm drags into Holly. Holly cuts him off with an inverted atomic drop, straight out of the Bret Hart playbook. Pat Rose kicked out of a Bob Holly leg drop, barely at the count of one, which, I'm starting to think isn't just a coincidence that all these people keep hitting leg drops in this company, and they all end up not even coming close to being the pinfall, but yeah. So they're working sleeper. Both men are going for it. Pat Rose had it on. Holly ran him into the turnbuckles. Holly tried to put it on. Pat Rose reversed it, and it just kind of broke out of it here. Holly going for a sunset flip here, and I'm assuming he's supposed to be taking him over with the roll up off the sunset flip, but he jumped too far. Pat Rose is horribly out of place, and they messed it up there. So they went in, they shot him off. Went for another back body drop of Pat Rose, but Holly hit a neck breaker. Now off the top rope with a top rope knee drop, a beautiful top rope knee drop, and he's going to get the pin right here. Yes, indeedy. And so Bob Holly picking up his second win here on Smoky Mountain Wrestling this week with a big win over Pat Rose. Big being, relatively speaking, big. We get the replay of the really big knee drop. And in just a second, we're going to be going to some local promos here with the Fantastics and, yep, our good friend Tim Horner. Let's go to that right now.
We have some great news for all you wrestling fans. You've been asking for it. You've been wanting it. Professional wrestling. And professional wrestling will return to your area very soon. We want you to keep watching television each week to find out when Smoky Mountain Wrestling will be in your area. And I have some of the stars of Smoky Mountain Wrestling here with me right now. White Lightning Tim Horner and the Fantastic. Tim, it's great. Smoky Mountain Wrestling back in everybody's hometown.
Well, you know, I'm tickled to death because, you know, I'm from East Tennessee.
Yes.
And to be able to come out in all these communities and all over the Smoky Mountain Wrestling area and wrestle, you know, I'm in my backyard. You know, for me to come out and see all the good people, you know, some of the best wrestling fans in the world is right here in the Smoky Mountain Wrestling area. You know, and I'm tickled to death to be here. The competition is strong, and I'm just real excited, Bob.
And I know, hey, Bobby, I know you agree with that 100%.
Well, you know, sir, I've been all over the world, and I'll tell you what, I see what's happening here with Smoky Mountain Wrestling is something that should be happening in wrestling. It's wrestling the way the fans like it. That's right. These people here, just like Tim said, are some of the greatest fans in the world. We've wrestled all over the United States, in Puerto Rico, we've wrestled in Japan. But I tell you, when it comes right down to it, when you get down here in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, these fans are some of the greatest. Isn't that right, Jackie? That's right. You know, Bobby, I can't wait to go from town to town and city to city, shake hands with all those great fans, and especially hug all those pretty young ladies.
Fans, it's going to be great. As again, we want to remind you, stay tuned to television. Watch each week Smoky Mountain Wrestling right here, and we'll be telling you from week to week where we're going to be and when we'll be in your area. You've been asking.
Alrighty, so we got about 30 seconds to the next promo. But of course, they say watch every week to find out when SMW will be in your hometown. I want to say I don't know how many takes it took for Horner to cut his promo, but when he finally finished his part of the promo here, Bobby Fulton had the biggest smile on his face, like finally, we can get on with this. And I'll come back with the rest of it here in just a minute because we're going to go to Ivan Koloff with his new partner.
Team.
Fans, last week right here on Smoky Mountain Wrestling, we saw the Fantastics defeat Ivan and Vladimir Koloff.
No, they
defeated
didn't.
them. They defeated them right here, Jim. And now Ivan, though, says he's got a new partner. So let's hear these words from Bobby Fulton of the Fantastics, what he has to say about that subject.
Hi, this is Bobby Fulton of the Fantastics, and speaking for Jackie and I want to tell you right now, a little later on in the program, we're going to find out just who will be the Russia Bear Ivan Koloff's partner. You know, they say that Vladimir's been called away, that he's been called back to Russia on some very important business. Well, let me tell you something like this, Koloff. This is the way it is to me. I think that we're one up on you right now, and I don't care who your partner is going to be. You can bring on anyone you want, because the Fantastics have proven in the past to be winners, and we're going to prove to the people of Smoky Mountain Wrestling we're going to be winners. So you bring on anybody you want. We're going to find out later on who it is.
All right, fans, and of course that's what Bobby Fulton had to say about that. Here is Ivan Koloff, and I assume his new partner, Ivan. Everybody's been wondering and everybody's anxiously been awaiting the word on who your new partner is going to be.
Well, look, I know you all got a lot of questions. I know you got a lot of questions. They have a lot of questions out there. Well, it's none of your business, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Yes, Vladimir went back to the Soviet Union, but he went back on official business for an extended period of time. But it wasn't you, Fantastics, that drove him out of wrestling. I know your obsession with getting even with the Koloffs and driving us out of America, driving us out of professional wrestling back to the Soviet Union. Well, it will not happen, and it is not true. Yes, I have allied myself in the absence of my nephew Vladimir with a class of Americans. And it is hard to find in America. And you know what I'm talking about, Bob Caudle. The name Jimmy Golden does not have to be introduced. He has made his mark on the professional wrestling, and he will continue to do it. But comrade, it is a pleasure to introduce you out here anyway.
Like I said, Vladimir had to go back to Moscow. You know that they're about to start up a second coup over there. This time, Vladimir's going to make sure that it's run right. While he's gone, I'm going to be taking his place. I understand that they're holding up some tag team belts here. You might as well give it to us now.
because you Fantastics has never beat nobody, and I'm going to go back here right now to the dressing room and find somebody with some authority and get us a match with them Fantastics tonight. Right now, anytime it don't make any difference, we're going to see what you boys are made of. We're going to separate the men from the boys.
Ivan Koloff and his new partner, Jimmy Golden, fans. Right now, let's go back to the ring for action.
All right, so that was a lot to digest. So first of all, going back to the local promo, did you notice Jackie Fulton's little comment about when they come out to all the local towns and getting to hug all the pretty ladies? And yeah, I'm sure all that they were going to do, and you can tell just by the smile on his face, I'm sure all that he wanted to do was hug all the pretty ladies. Nothing else, you know? What's so wrong with that, right? Then we got the promo. So Vladimir Koloff has been called back to Russia. And I gotta say, Mid-South did the same thing with Iron Sheik. And especially in 1992, to use the phrase that Jim Cornette has coined on his show, lazy booking. The guy's leaving the territory, and you need to come up with a reason why he's leaving. And the reason he came up with is he's been called away to his home country. It's, it is what it is. And so Ivan Koloff needed a new partner, and instead of going out and getting a new Russian, he went out and got Jimmy Golden, who the name may not sound familiar to those listening, but to those mid-90s WCW fans, he wrestled there for a bit as Bunkhouse Buck. And Jimmy Golden said Russia's about to start a second coup. And notable, Jimmy Golden, and it's like I never really thought he was a gigantic man. He's still large, but not like hugely large. He towers over both Bob Caudle and Ivan Koloff. And I mean, Ivan is on the short side anyway, but it's like, Jimmy Golden is like Andre the Giant, in this interview here with Vince McMahon, when Andre used to stand on the box to do interviews with Vince in the old early 80s on Championship Wrestling. So we move to our next match here. It is Joey Maggs, Jumpin' Joey Maggs versus Hustler Rip Rogers. Rogers coming off a loss to Paul Orndorff last week. And there's an older lady who's really angry in the front row. And I'll be honest, wrestling is more fun when there's old people in the crowd in the front row being super angry, because it's just, I don't know, it's a lot more fun. During the match, Caudle tells us that Bullet Bob is in quote unquote the Orient with Wally Yamaguchi talking about trading talent. So I'm not sure if he's, and that's kind of like another one of those things. Like, really, this is the excuse he came up with here, where, Wally Yamaguchi was in America just last week, and so why did they have to go back to Japan to continue to discuss trading talent? I guess that is what it is. So we got this match here. I mean, it is what it is with Maggs and Rip Rogers. It's not setting the world on fire. Maggs punched Rogers in the face, which caused Rip to turn a full 90 degrees. And this match is just continuing here. Let's dive into news happening in the world of wrestling this week. And actually, a news story a whole lot bigger than this was going on. Police officers attempted a raid of the WWF before a house show in St. Louis. This was a famous story where Linda McMahon somehow got tipped off that this was going to happen. And so they called all the wrestlers in their hotels, or just got the word out to everybody what was happening, and to make sure not to bring anything potentially illegal to the arena that night. And so the St. Louis PD, the St. Louis Police Department said that it was, quote unquote, either an ongoing DEA investigation or one hell of a strong tip. Now, this, as you recall, this is after Zahorian was found guilty of steroid abuse, or not steroid abuse, steroid distribution. The DEA is after Vince. The FBI is after Vince. They, they're trying to catch him in the act here. And who knows what would have happened if Linda wouldn't have gotten tipped off. But she did, and, nothing happened. And it would be smart of me to not insinuate that anything happened. In the ring, by the way, Rip Rogers just hit a superplex that's called the Ripperplex to pick up the win here. So now Rip Rogers improves his record to 1-1 here on Smoky Mountain Wrestling TV. And Joey Maggs drops to 0-1 here in this battle of well-known enhancement talent. Yeah, nice superplex. It's not off the top rope. It's, the middle rope variation. Still look good. Rip picks up the win. And we got the coming up next. Rock and Roll Robert Gibson is going to be next. Oh boy. And so no promos between matches in this one, which is weird to usually have something, even if it's just the fans in this area. If your high school JV club and whatever else need to do a fundraiser, call Smoky Mountain Wrestling. We don't even get that one. We usually get that 3 or 4 times a show. But we have Robert Gibson going 1-on-1 with the Mighty Yankee. The Yankee is wearing a blue mask with lightning bolts and hails from, quote-unquote, up north. And the fans do not care. But the fans did care about his opponent, Rock and Roll Robert Gibson. As we mentioned before, Ricky Morton is still in WCW at this point, and he's going to be there for a few more months. So Gibson is here as a single for now. And so here we go with this match here. Now, as we mentioned, elsewhere in the wrestling world, we're talking about drugs. It's drug problem, steroid problem in wrestling was crazy at this point. In the WWF this week, Road Warrior Hawk, Texas Tornado Kerry Von Erich, and Jimmy Snuka have all been suspended. You can use your own theories on why they got suspended, but Snuka actually ended up fired, and Kerry was suspended because allegedly Fritz called him up and said that Kerry needed to go to rehab, and you find out why. And I mean, come on, you've seen Kerry Von Erich around this time. It really should not have been a surprise to anybody, why he needed to go to rehab. There's a famous match with him and Rick Martel on a Madison Square Garden show where he is a little wasted, to say it nicely here. And actually at this point, Kerry had just been arrested this week for forging drug prescriptions. So he has that to look forward to. And I think that's one of the things that sadly led to his passing in about a year from now. Whereas he just he had several legal cases come up all at the same time. He was facing jail time, and well, he decided he didn't want to go to jail. And not that I blame him in the least. We've still got a couple minutes, but while this match is taking place, I should let you know that after this match, we had one of those streaks where we're just going to hit promo after promo after promo, and we'll play them all through. There is like a 2-minute gap where I'll come back, but there's a lot of promos right in a row, so we'll play them all, and then I'll recap them here for you. But, yeah. So let's see here. By the way, Mighty Yankee is looking a lot better in this match than you would think. Corny pointed out at one point that the Midnight Express, that the Rock and Roll Express may be 4-time World Tag Team Champions, but the Midnight Express took the belts from Rock and Roll once upon a time. And actually, Robert's dad, Ricky, is having health issues, and Caudle sends his best wishes to the Gibson family during this trying time. Yankee suplexes Gibson into the ring here, and here we go with an Irish whip. Yankee hits a big corner clothesline. He whips him into the opposite corner and misses, and Gibson moves out of another one and hits a running bulldog, shoots the half, and picks up the win. So Robert Gibson wins again. He's 2-0 here on Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and the fans love him. You know, we're a long way off of the rock and roll, getting tiring in this territory here. And we get the replay of the nice bulldog, and we're about to go to an interview with Bob Caudle and Jim Cornette, and we're going to keep it on as they recap last week's Dutch Scott Armstrong match.
Caudle right here with Jim Cornette again. Jim, we talked about tag team wrestlers and championships. What about Jim Cornette's tag team?
You know something? These people in this town look like a genetic experiment gone wrong. Do you realize that? You know, it's a sad state of affairs in this country. You don't know who to believe in. You don't know who to take at their word anymore. For example, Magic Johnson, a sports hero to millions of Americans, come to find out he completes more passes off the court than he does on. Then you got Pee Wee Herman, an idol for all the little children. Come to find out he likes to play solitaire in crowded theaters. The state of Louisiana elects an indicted criminal to the highest office in the state, and he was the best choice. And then you got Reverend Jerry Falwell up there in Lynchburg, right? You got Jimmy Swaggart down there in Louisiana, Jimmy Swaggart, trying to save all the fallen women, saving them all for himself. You don't know whose word to believe in anymore. But I tell you something, you can believe in Jim Cornette. If I tell you the sun's not going to come up tomorrow, you better go out and buy you a flashlight. And I'm saying that I'm bringing the most dynamic tag team ever seen in wrestling right here to Smoky Mountain Wrestling. They're going to have a tournament for the Smoky Mountain Tag Team title in the coming weeks. And when that tournament takes place, my team will be in it. When that tournament's over, my team will be the champions, whether these hillbillies like it or not.
Fans, we'll be back. We'll have more right after this.
We're just going to stay put for a few seconds because they're about to come back with more from Bob and Jim.
Fans, last week right here on Smoky Mountain Wrestling, Dutch Mantell faced Scott Armstrong in a tremendous match. Jim, we want to go back to the closing moments of that match.
See how Dutch beat him?
You know, and see how Brian Lee became involved in that match after it was all over. Watch this, fans.
Alrighty, so they're showing us what happened last week with Dutch and Scott Armstrong when Dutch picked up the win. And then had a little post-match angle with Brian Lee. So Jim Cornette talks about his new tag team, and he's trying to get over the fact that, when he says something's going to happen, you can take his word, to the bank pretty much, and he mentions, people who you thought were trustworthy, you thought that they were stand-up people, but they turned out not to be, like Magic Johnson testing HIV positive. But he doesn't say that. He talks about Pee Wee Herman being caught masturbating in public, but he doesn't say that. He's great at walking that line and, talking about what he's talking about without actually saying it, but you know what he's saying. And he mentions the controversies with Jerry Falwell and a few others. But here he is with no controversies. When he says something, it happens. We saw years in the NWA where, he said the Midnight Express were going to win the tag titles. They did. He said the Midnight Express were going to win the U.S. tag titles. And they did. And they held them forever. And he said they'd get rid of Paul E's original Midnight Express. And they did. So it's like you can believe him when he tells you something, even if you don't want to hear it. And by the way, I was mistaken. Dutch didn't win last week. He was disqualified when he took Shoe Baby, his whip, and began whipping Scott Armstrong with it before Brian Lee ran in with his giant stick. Really, he runs in with a giant stick. I wonder, if wrestling's supposed to be real and Corny's supposed to make us believe that, this stuff may actually be real, why was, Brian Lee just standing backstage with a giant stick? Oh, well. But we're going to come back here with more with Cottle and JC, and then some more with Dutch Mantel and Mr. Ron Wright.
Well, I tell you, fans, that was something. And then right after
the guy is a maniac. He came in there with a big board to try to kill somebody.
Right after that happened, though, Jim, and fans, you saw it, Commissioner Bob Armstrong signed this week's big main event, and that's Dutch Mantel against Brian Lee. Now, earlier today, Dutch had these comments about that match coming up a little later in this hour.
Mr. Wright, your condition and your plight has saddened me to the bottoms of my heart. And I know how hard it is when you need something and you need money. I know how hard it is. There, but for the grace of God, I could be sitting in that same chair, and I know I'd want somebody to help me. I know you're looking for wrestlers to manage to make you some money. Now, I'm not really talking about myself because I've always done things on my own. But I know you're looking for people. I want to ask you to do me one favor. I know you're looking for people. If you would escort me to the ring today against that low-life, egg-sucking Brian Lee and sit in my corner, I would consider it an honor and a privilege, because I'm going to take that man today right here on television. I'm going to give him a wrestling lesson. And you might see something after I'm done that you might like. Would you do that for me?
I'll tell you, Dutch, you know, you brought tears to an old man's eye that's kind of down on his luck, and I'll be glad to. But right now, that Brian Lee don't really show me nothing. But I'll tell you, you know, Medicare won't pay for my hip knee implant, and maybe after you get done with him, he might make something out of it and do it.
Thank you.
Well, we see that Mr. Ron Wright has been invited to ringside to watch that match. I hope that's all he's going to do.
I hope poor Mr. Wright doesn't get hurt. He's so frail.
Fans, don't go away. We'll be back with more action right after this.
Ron Wright is just the best. It's like, this is just tremendous. So Dutch is building up his match with Brian Lee coming up later on today. And he's got Mr. Ron Wright. Mr. Ron Wright, poor old man in a wheelchair. He needs himself a wrestler to help him pay for his hip and knee implant operations. And Medicare won't pay. And I can speak from experience from working in, you know, health insurance for so long. Medicare doesn't like to pay for anything. Not that many insurances do, but Medicare especially is a pain in the rear end. So we got Barry Horowitz and Tim Horner, hometown Tim Horner. Let's listen to his intro.
Weighing in at 224 pounds from Morristown, Tennessee, White Lightning, Tim Horner.
Jim, not only do they love Horner here, but they respect the young man because he's just that kind of an individual.
Oh, look
Clean
at that,
cut,
look at that,
outstanding
look at
youngster.
that, look at that little snot-nosed pablum dripping down its stinking chin with the little lightning bolt.
Who are we talking about?
That little kid they got a shot of on the camera, it would have brought a tear to a glass eye. I'll tell you what, bad boy Barry Horowitz right here.
So this is Tim Horner's hometown, Morristown, Tennessee. He gets the big hometown introduction, and while he's popular to an extent, Rock and Roll Robert Gibson was still far more over in the last segment, and it wasn't even close. You just heard Corny make fun of a kid at ringside with one of the Tim Horner foam lightning bolts. Apparently he did sell a couple of those. And yeah, whatchamacallit wasn't even paying attention, Cottle. Going back to Ron Wright, it's like, you know, Dutch Mantel, you know, Dutch, you know, he doesn't need a manager because he's always done things by himself, but, you know, he's here, you know, he's here and he's here to get Mr. Ron Wright in his corner, and he considers it an honor to have Ron Wright in his corner. So Barry Horowitz here, a lifetime enhancement talent, would go on to get perhaps his biggest win of his career when he beat fellow Smoky Mountain alum Chris Candido in the WWF in 1995. And, you know, it's kind of sad that Candido, you know, he really didn't have a better run in the WWF. I mean, he obviously had his issues. You know, he ran afoul of the clique because, you know, of course he did. And, you know, he died young, and, you know, he'd cleaned up his act before he passed away, and died due to complications from a surgery after breaking his leg in a TNA pay-per-view.
You know, Tim Horner, he must have paid every single citizen of Morristown, Tennessee to come and fill this gym tonight and cheer for him. He must have paid them.
Jim, follow the action here a minute. My director out in the truck is trying to get a message to me. I want to see what he's got to say here.
What now? Have you got another one of those phone calls? What is it?
Yeah, I got a phone call coming up right here.
Jeez, I tell you what. Bob Caudle is talking to the director. I've got to do everything myself. Tim Horner locked up again with Barry Horowitz. The people are gonna respect and cheer for everything Horner does here, but I know that Horowitz is gonna come out on top of this thing. I got faith in my heart.
Hey, I just got great news from our director. We understand that the officials, the Smoky Mountain officials, have signed our big main event for next week, and it's the Fantastics against Ivan Koloff and Jimmy Golden. The match that everybody's wanted, it'll be right here.
Well, that's what Jimmy Golden said he was going to do. He was going to go right back and find somebody with some official capacity to sign that match. And wait a minute.
So, first of all, Cornette says that Horner must have paid every citizen of Morristown, Tennessee to come out. And considering Tim Horner made the legitimate suggestion to that when the first episode of Smoky Mountain aired, he suggested to boost the ratings for the show that he would go down to Best Buy and turn all of the televisions there to Smoky Mountain Wrestling to try to increase the ratings. And it would not surprise me if Horner was paying people to come to the show, but you know, here we are. So we did get Caudle announcing that the main event next week would be the Fantastics 2-on-2 against the brand new tag team of Ivan Koloff and Jimmy Golden. And so Horner and Horowitz are having their match here. It's fine because, I mean, like I've said, Tim Horner is a lot better wrestler than he's a talker. And Horner with a full body attack on Horowitz here. And he's building up momentum. Get out the hammer and nails, folks, because Tim Horner is building momentum. Throws Horowitz into the corner. Horowitz has his flying shoes on tonight because he takes a punch and goes flying almost out of the ring. And Horner just having his way here with Barry. Goes for the cover. And nope, Horowitz is going to kick out here. And whip each other into the ropes. Horner hangs onto the ropes. And he's going to bridge him. Nope, Horowitz hangs on the ropes again. Nope, Horner gets him. Rolls him up with the natural bridge, the world's slowest bridge in wrestling. And Tim Horner picks up the win. And hooray, Tim Horner. Because the world needs more and more Tim Horner in their lives. And right after a quick replay, oh yes, we have more Tim Horner to listen to here.
Hey, Bob, he must want to talk to you. I don't want to have any part of him.
All righty, fans, moving right here with us, Tim Horner. Tim, in front of all the hometown folks, that was a great win for you.
Well, thank you. I just want to say I'm happy to be in Tennessee, happy to be in Morristown, Tennessee, and I'm happy to be in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. I just like to appreciate all the fan support. I appreciate everybody. Thanks.
And they appreciate you, Tim Horner. Fans, we'll be back.
Because what the world needed was not just Tim Horner cutting a promo, tired Tim Horner cutting a promo. But at least this time, he only had like 15 seconds.
We're back here on Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And Bob, before we go to the ring for today's TV main event, Dutch Mantell taking on primetime Brian Lee, let's hear these words from another superstar coming to Smoky Mountain Wrestling, Nature Boy Buddy Landell.
Not that I need any introduction, because all you pukes out there know that the Nature Boy Buddy Landell, you've seen him in all the other major wrestling organizations. The reason why I've not stayed there is because I don't kiss nobody's can. I don't do promoters favors. They tell me in Smoky Mountain Wrestling I can be myself. Nature Boy can pull out eyeballs, slap hair lips on people, and see them walking across the street, and then have somebody else ask them, go, what happened to you? They go, well, money went them to hell went on me, and then when the with of my wife, I got to walk around like this. Don't go with Smoky Mountain Wrestling because they don't do nobody no favors. That's right. The guys that you've seen here, like Robert Gibson, Jimmy Cornette, Stan Lane, Tim Horner, guys like that, they're tough guys. That's the reason why they're not no place else. It's because when the promoters, I tell you what they need to do, they need to put stop signs on their back behinds. That way when they stop going around the corner, these other guys don't break their nose. I got my nose broke, all right, in fist fights. That's exactly what I'm talking about. I don't do no favors for nobody, and I'm here for one reason, because I'm a god around here. I don't care if it's Asheville, North Carolina, Knoxville, Tennessee, Morristown, Asheville, North Carolina, Greenville. I don't care where it's at. I'm the Nature Boy, Buddy Landell, and I got a bad attitude, and I got a big ego, and if I have to go in the ring and slap the figure 4 on everybody in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, that's just exactly what I'm going to do. I'm the Nature Boy. Smoky Mountain Wrestling's where it's at.
So they talk about how, Buddy Landell, and he kind of reiterates things we've heard before, where, Smoky Mountain Wrestling isn't about favors. It isn't about who you know or whose butt you kiss. It's about being the best wrestler. We've heard this already in other promos, in the last couple of weeks, but it gets reiterated here. The funny thing is, Landell says he's allowed to be himself. And we're going to find out here in a couple months that they don't really want him to be himself. Not completely, anyway. But, for at least the next few months, we do have Boudreaux here. And, Buddy is another great heel promo, and it's kind of wacky that all the good promos in the show are all heels. Dutch Mantell, Jim Cornette, Ron Wright, now Buddy Landell. It's like, honestly, like, who is the best babyface promo? Maybe Gibson at this point? It's kind of wacky because, Corny learned booking in a lot of ways from Dusty Rhodes. And, if you watch, the NWA shows in the mid-'80s, even though the baby faces weren't, in a lot of cases, the best wrestlers, baby faces cut, some of the best promos. Like, yeah, you had Flair on the heel side, but you had Dusty on the babyface side. You had the Rock and Rolls on the babyface side. You had, like, all these other baby faces who could cut great promos. And here we are with Smoky Mountain, where the baby faces are already, for the most part, a step below. But, now the promo abilities are at least 2 steps below the heels. Let's see.
Mantell has invited Mr. Ron Wright to ringside to watch this match, but so far I don't see Mr. Wright. I hope that the poor thing hasn't maybe caught that flu that's been going around. Maybe we'll see Mr. Wright before the end of the match.
What do you mean, poor thing? I mean, Jim, poor thing does not adequately describe.
Wait a minute. Oh, shut up, Bob. Here comes Mr. Wright now. I knew he was going to come out and watch this thing because Dutch was so nice to invite him. You see, Dutch Mantell doesn't want a manager, but he figures that after he gives Brian Lee an attitude adjustment, that maybe, just maybe, there might be something there that Ron Wright could work with and mold and, make something out of Brian Lee.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Ron right now, Mr. Jim, why in the heck does he want everybody to call him Mr.?
He told me he wants people to call him Mr. because he's a senior citizen. People these days, the kids, these punk kids, they don't have respect for their elders. And after all, the man, he's a poor old broken down, crippled man just trying to get an operation.
Oh, Jim, that's a little heavy there.
No, not at all. He's a kind, gentle old man.
Here's the guy that was the most hated wrestler of all time in Tennessee back during the 60s and 70s, Jim. He was crippling people. He was putting them out of wrestling.
Oh, come on.
He was a despicable character, and all of the fans know it, and they remember it. He's been attacked by the fans. I think, suspended by promoters.
The fans are a bunch of rednecks. The promoters were all against him. I have a perfectly valid explanation for all that. Ron Wright was a kind-hearted man. He was beloved in this part of the country.
I can't believe all he's going to do is just watch this match.
Well, what else can he do? The man's in a wheelchair, Bob. What is he going to sprout wings? Come on.
What is he going to do? Sprout wings? So in case you couldn't figure out, because I was talking about Buddy Landell, the main event has started. It's Dutch Mantel versus Primetime Brian Lee. One last thing before I move off Landell is, did you notice he mentioned Stan Lane being in Smoky Mountain Wrestling? So we're not supposed to know Stan Lane's in Smoky Mountain yet because Stan Lane hasn't been on the show yet. But so it was nice of Boudreaux to spoil it, and nice of Corny to not have Landell retape that one, or at least edit that one out. So here we go with the main event. It's Dutch in Primetime. Dutch has invited, Mr. Ron Wright to ringside. And, for the people who don't know who Ron Wright was, we had Bob Caudle explaining who, man, I'm losing my train of thought here, who Ron Wright is, why he's such a despicable human being who, even though he's an older man in a, wheelchair, he doesn't deserve our sympathies here. And yeah, Dutch, by the way, Jim Cornette thinks that the referee is related to Brian Lee because he's ruling a couple times in favor of Primetime, even though Brian Lee is about a foot taller than the referee and has, shall we say, much more favorable genetics. The only thing the two of them seem to have in common is they're both blonde. Dutch Mantel slaps on the Mike Rotunda abdominal stretch, complete with a handful of ropes. The old lady I mentioned earlier at ringside is screaming and losing her shit at this despicable act of cheating here by Dutch Mantel. And the match is just continuing here. Ron Wright, being a kind old man, sitting at ringside, just watching the wrestling. Because, the poor guy, he needs his operations. He needs, he needs a hip operation. He needs a knee operation. And Medicare and Medicaid won't pay for them. And, it's hard as a pro wrestler to get insurance anyway. And now he's a retired wrestler trying to pay his, health bills. And let's go to the finish of the match here.
Hey, wait a minute.
What did he give him? Hey, I told you he wasn't going to come out.
He didn't give him anything.
He handed him something. Mantel's got something in his hand.
But Brian Lee blocked the punch. Brian Lee blocked it.
He's about to take it away from him.
Whoa, he nailed Dutch Mantel.
He's got him covered. Here comes referee Darryl Mars. 1, 2. Oh, wait a minute.
Look at that!
He stopped.
He didn't take it off his hand. That stupid idiot Brian Lee did not take the knucks off his hand.
Come on. Come on, what are you doing? He's going to raise on.
He's disqualified him.
Heck no, he can't do that. I don't believe he can.
Wait a minute. Look, I hope Mr. Wright gets out all right.
So, yep. So, Mr. Ron Wright passes Dutch a foreign object. Brian Lee grabs it off Dutch, knocks him out, makes the cover, but he kept the knucks on his hand. The referee saw it and disqualified Brian Lee. And so Dutch Mantel's your winner. Let's go to some local promos now with Bob Caudle introducing the fans. He's doing a little bit of intro right now, so we'll just say it here. Dutch, by the way, waved his hands on, so it looked like he was trying to get Brian Lee to come out and fight him to the back, but Brian didn't pick up on the cue, and he just walked to the back without a fight. Let's go now to those local promos with Bob Caudle and Mr. Ron Wright and Bob Holly and Jim Cornette.
Right, Ron. I appreciate it. It is a pleasure to be here on this Smoky Mountain Wrestling. We've got some of the finest wrestlers in the entire world right here in Smoky Mountain. Everybody in this area knows I was the greatest wrestler in the world. I'm the living legend. I'm out here. I've still not found the team that I want yet so I can manage somebody and have this hip implant surgery. But, I'm kind of down with arthritis in the back and the knee and still take nitroglycerin, but I'm going to get there, Bob. Thank you.
All right, fans, he's just one of the many. Speaking of the many, let's bring in right here Hollywood Bob Holly. Bob?
Hold on a second, Bob Caudle. I don't have too much time, you see, because I have a limousine waiting out back for me because I have a dinner date with Julia Roberts tonight. So I have to fly to Los Angeles in just a few minutes.
Hey, Bob, I just want to tell you, the limo driver, shut up, Bob Cottle. The limo driver's out there waiting right now, but I want to say one thing for all the people thinking about coming back to see live professional wrestling. When you see a guy like Hollywood Bob Holly, brother, he's got a right hand that will knock your head off. He's got a right hand that will knock your teeth so far down your throat they'll have to clear customs to come back. When you see a guy like this in action, when you see a guy like me, the tag team that I'm bringing to Smoky Mountain Wrestling, or anybody else coming live to your town, you ain't never seen anything like it. You may have been to the World's Fair, may have been to the rodeo, but you have never seen anything like Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
Hey, who needs Bob Holly to cut his own promo anyway? Corny's a lot better. So a quick break, and then Brian Lee's going to come in and finish off the show here. And then I'll be back to recap everything.
Fans right here with us now. The young man that was just robbed in the ring, primetime Brian Lee. Brian, no doubt, Ron Wright. We said he wasn't going to just sit there ringside, and he gave Mantell that object.
You're exactly right, Bob. Ron Wright, Dutch Mantell, I don't know who you boys think you are, but you're messing with prime time now. Since you're such good buddies, Dutch Mantell, I think I might put you in a wheelchair right beside Ron. Bob, I don't care what it takes. I've been ripped off. The people have been ripped off. I want a rematch. I don't care. I want it now. I don't care where it's at. Locker room, parking lot, in the ring. Dutch Mantell, you're mine.
And I know, and all the fans do too, that you really deserve that. And you'll have an eye, no doubt, on Ron Wright this time.
You're exactly right. Ron Wright, like I say, Dutch Mantell, both of you are going down. You may be good, but you're not ready for prime time.
2 weeks in a row now, fans, we've seen Ron Wright as he's interfered with a match when he came down at ringside. Supposedly, each time Ron Wright was there, he was just going to observe what was going to go on in the ring. He did it last week, and again he did it this week to Brian Lee. That's going to wrap it up. See you next week. Don't forget that main event. See you then.
So I've now had 3 shows with Mr. Ron Wright, and coming out and getting involved in the main event of the show, this week costing Brian Lee the big main event match. And Brian Lee announced that he will at some point have a rematch with Dutch Mantell, and when he does, he will keep his eye on Mr. Ron Wright when it happens. We also heard the local promos with Mr. Ron Wright, Bob Holly, and Jim Cornette. I mean, we've heard they're all fine promos, but they're all the local promos we've heard, similar ones in the past, because they don't have any house shows yet until I believe the beginning of May is their first house show. So right now there's not really any localized promos. They're all just general, hey, at some point we're coming to your area and you need to make sure to come out and watch us kind of thing. And, Corny, I forget who he said he heard this from, but Corny's method was that you had to be on TV in a local area for 90 days before you could start running house shows there. And that's kind of why the first Knoxville show isn't until the middle of May, and the first house show is until the beginning of May. And that's it. So that does it for the show here. Next week, we have the tag team main event with Ivan and Jimmy Golden versus the Fantastics. By the way, just to clear up a few of the things going on This Week in Wrestling, because This Week in Wrestling is a big friggin' deal. Barry Orton, who is Randy Orton's uncle and wrestled in the WWF as Barry O, has made his claim that one of the reasons why he lost his job with the WWF was due to turning down the advances of homosexual wrestlers in the company, or homosexual office workers. And of course, one of them he's insinuating is Pat Patterson. And of course, this becomes a much bigger deal than just an accusation. So we'll see what's going on there in the next couple of weeks. And we got to spread the bad news around. WCW had their first accusation of racial discrimination. Of course, it's also not their last, but it is their first. And the accusation was that the average salary for a black wrestler was around half the average for the white wrestlers. I think the averages were like $104,000 for the African American wrestlers and about $205,000 for the white wrestlers. And WCW also had 2 white wrestlers. And this is what was reported at the time, and I'm just quoting it here, and you can figure out what they mean by this, is that they had 2 white wrestlers, quote unquote, pretending to be black, talking about Mark Merrow, who's Johnny B. Bad, which admittedly, it's like Merrow got that really deep tan. And I'll tell you what, when I was a kid, I thought he was black. Like, I never doubted it for a second. The other one was PN News, which I don't know, maybe I'm just forgetting some obvious angle, but he wasn't supposed to be an African American. He was a white rapper, which, it is what it is. Now, as part of their response to this racial accusation, WCW rehired Junkyard Dog and Teddy Long. All right, I guess whatever, but it is what it is. So that's going to do it here for Smoky Mountain Wrestling, or Smoky Mountain Wrestling Re-Watch-Along Project. And so we're going to be back here next week with episode number 004. And remember, this is podcasting the way it used to be and the way you like it. But until next week, I want to thank you all for listening and have a good rest of your week here, folks.